In a seemingly perfect marriage of 24 years, Malcolm Harris is blindsided by betrayal. His wife, Jessica, hides a web of secrets, including an affair that shatters their trust. As Malcolm's suspicions grow, a chance encounter with his sister-in-law, Claire, reveals a truth too painful to bear. Driven by rage and confusion, Malcolm confronts Jessica only to uncover more lies, questions about the paternity of their children. Torn between love and vengeance, Malcolm spirals into a dangerous quest for the truth. With emotions running high and tension thick, their once stable life unravels in a series of shocking revelations. Can Malcolm survive the ultimate betrayal, or will it destroy everything he holds dear? Malcolm Harris was not a happy man, and neither was his wife, Jessica. Lately, their marriage felt a bit dull. To be honest, it wasn't just dull. It seemed to have come to a standstill. They were trying, but the bond between them was getting more and more strained. They had been married for 24 years and had known each other for almost 30 years. You would think that after all this time, they would have figured things out. But this time it felt different. He didn't know when it started, but he remembered when he noticed it. It was 6 weeks ago on a Saturday night. They had spent the day shopping as they usually did for the past 10 years. After shopping, they stopped for a meal at their favorite place. Although they could have picked something different, they ended up ordering the same dishes they always did. Then it was back home to put things away and watch a little TV. As it got close to 10 p.m., Malcolm began to feel excited, as he often did on Saturday nights after years of their routine together. Most weekends went like this. Only a few times had their plans changed, usually because of Jesse's monthly cycle or, less often, if one of them was feeling unwell. Jessica was 46 and hadn't reached the age that often worried men, known as menopause. They had decided to be careful, avoiding pregnancy as Jessica wasn't on any birth control. Still, Malcolm looked forward to Saturday nights each week because they both worked long hours. Jessica mostly cooked and cleaned, while Malcolm helped with chores too. Though he did his part, Jessica often said she was too tired or not in the mood. Those good days felt far away. Lately, Malcolm had tried to find time during the week for them, but Jessica never seemed interested. Saturday nights were special to him. When 10 p.m. came, he waited for Jessica to head upstairs, take a shower, and then come to bed after he freshened up. He felt a small smile creep onto his face as he anticipated their usual routine. Yes, he was really looking forward to his time with Jessica. However, she stayed in her seat, focused on a book, occasionally glancing at the TV before returning to her reading. He continued to wait. As his excitement built, so did his disappointment. Finally, he gently asked, "Honey, are you going to shower?" It was a moment before she looked up at him, blinking a few times through her reading glasses. "I'm sorry, honey, what did you say?" she asked, not showing any sign that she had heard him. "I asked if you were going to take a shower," he said, trying to brush off the question, hoping she would catch on. "Oh," she replied, looking away. After a moment, she took a deep breath and faced him again. "Not tonight, Malcolm." He wasn't sure if he had heard her right. Malcolm sat there for a few seconds, a bit shocked, while his wife went back to her book. She didn't look sick, and he knew it wasn't a bad time for her. When that happened, she usually got cranky, but now she seemed completely normal. Plus, she would have told him if something was wrong, but he still asked just to be safe. He had been working long extra hours at the factory lately and came home tired, so maybe he had missed something. "Are you feeling okay, Jessie?" Without looking up from her book, she replied, "Yeah, I'm fine." He waited a little longer to see if she would say more, but she kept reading. "So what's the problem?" he asked with a heavy sigh. She closed her book sharply, set it down, and stood up. "What do you mean? Just because I don't want to do this tonight, you think something's wrong?" "Look, Malcolm, I just don't feel like it. It's that simple." "Okay." His thoughts were jumbled by her surprising answer. He tried to make sense of what she had said, but couldn't find a clear reason for her behavior. He felt lost. All he could do was stare at her in surprise and a bit of resentment. Her tone was cold, firm, and definitely serious. And in her quiet voice, he thought he heard something he had only heard in other places, never in his home. She turned and walked toward the stairs, almost jogging up to the second floor. But before she left, he saw something on her face that made him feel sick inside. As soon as he noticed it, her expression went blank and calm. He sat there feeling very alone, and a heavy feeling grew in his stomach. Sometimes he would slowly start to notice changes in his home. As the kids grew older, he would see small changes in them, and if he didn't understand why, he would think about it until he figured it out. This time, though, it all hit him suddenly, out of nowhere. She had pulled away from him, and he had missed all the signs. He didn't know what had caused Jesse's change, but he suspected it hadn't happened overnight. It had probably been happening for years, maybe even always, but she had managed to hide it from him or deal with it in a better way, until tonight. And that realization didn't help him feel any better. Malcolm felt very confused and deep down, unsure of himself. He loved his wife a lot, even more than he did when they first met 30 years ago. When he was 17, he was at the park with his friends. They were drinking some beer to celebrate his birthday and enjoying the sunny day when a girl ran by. They joked and called out to her, but she just gave them a quick look and kept running past, disappearing into the trees. Malcolm had gone out with a few girls before, but this girl made his heart race and his stomach flutter. He knew he had to meet her. She was stunning. It took weeks before he saw her again, even though he went to the park every chance he got, hoping to spot her. He loved to imagine what it would be like to talk to her. He spent hours dreaming about their meeting. But how could someone be ready to meet someone so amazing? Still, he wanted to try. One sunny Sunday, as he leaned against his car, almost napping, he heard quick footsteps crunching on the leaves. He stood up, shaking off his sleepiness, and tried to act relaxed. Then, she appeared. She was wearing the same outfit as before, maybe with a different pattern on her shirt. But he was too focused on how nice she looked and how her shirt moved as she ran. Feeling brave, he waved his hand and thought he should be cool. But she didn't look his way. Knowing he had only a moment, he pushed off the car, stood tall, and called out to her, "Hi!" She didn't slow down, but she turned her head and smiled at him. That feeling he had before came back even stronger this time, like a rush of excitement. His knees felt weak and his heart raced. He wanted to say more, but his mouth wouldn't open. "Oh no! Try again!" But when he spoke, it came out like a funny sound, not strong and confident. He quickly tried to clear his throat, but his mouth felt dry. Before he could say anything else, she was gone, lost in the trees. He stood there, dazed, feeling as if he had missed an important chance. For a moment, he thought about running after her, but he didn't want to scare her away. Regret washed over him. He had his moment, and he missed it. Thank goodness she didn't hear him. She might have laughed and never looked at him again. Then another thought crossed his mind, and it wasn't a nice one. What if I sounded like a frog every time I was near her? Feeling sad and upset about not being able to talk to her, and frustrated with his unexpectedly squeaky voice, he opened the door of his old 1967 Camaro. He got in and was about to start the engine when he heard a loud scream, quickly followed by silence. He wasn't sure if it was her, the amazing girl he admired, but he knew someone was in trouble. Without thinking, he jumped out of the car and rushed down the path. In just a few seconds, he reached her, but she wasn't alone. Two big men had grabbed her and were trying to pull her into the bushes. Without hesitating, he ran towards them, doing the only thing he could think of. He charged into all three of them with all his strength. One of the men noticed just in time. He looked up at Malcolm, eyes wide with surprise and maybe a little fear, right before everything went dark with a loud crash of pain. "Oh, please, wake up," he thought. It felt like an angel was calling to him. He tried to open his eyes. As soon as he did, a sharp pain hit him. It throbbed painfully in his head, but then eased a bit. He felt someone gripping his arm and tried to open his eyes again. The pain was still there, but now felt a little better. One of his eyes was blurry, but the other one was clear. He saw a beautiful girl, like an angel. No, it was the amazing girl. "Can you stand up?" she asked. "I think so." But as he pushed himself up, a new pain shot through his right arm and he groaned. He fell back down. "We can't stay here. I think you knocked them out, but they're starting to move and could wake up at any moment. Can you try to get up again? I'll help you. Please try." Her soothing voice was filled with worry. "Okay, I'll try." He used his other arm this time and it worked. After a few moments, he managed to stand, though he was shaky. He wasn't in a good shape to fight, and as she said, they needed to leave. He looked at her and she looked back, smiling a little. "We need to go. I'll help you with that," she said, putting her arm around him and guiding him away, moving in the direction she had been running. "Wait," he said, stopping her. "Do you have a car nearby?" "No," she replied, shaking her head. "I was running away from the house." "Okay, my car is close by. Let's go the other way," he said. "If we want to escape, we should hurry." Malcolm tried to explain without getting too mixed up in his words. He thought he might collapse from the pain, but somehow he stayed on his feet. He doubted she could carry him if he fell. It wouldn't be nice to faint after already making noises in front of her. Without saying anything, she turned and started to lead him to the car. They didn't talk much. They stayed quiet, trying not to make any noise so the bandits wouldn't know where they were if they woke up. They reached the car without any trouble, but they thought they heard angry voices nearby. "Do you know how to drive?" Malcolm asked her, giving a weak smile. "I don't think I can drive well enough without crashing," he said, pointing at his sore arm. She looked at his arm and nodded. "Yes, I can drive, both automatic and manual. Give me the keys," she said. Panic washed over Malcolm as he searched his pants pockets but found no keys. She saw his worried look and asked, "Did you drop your keys?" "I don't know. I was just about to leave when I heard," he said, glancing at the ignition. "Yes, the keys are in the car. Come on, get in. I think I hear them coming," she said, her voice trembling with nerves. With some effort, Malcolm moved to the passenger side and sat down. It felt odd to be in the passenger seat of his own car. The engine roared to life as she adjusted the steering wheel. She backed up and then drove quickly out of the park. The engine of the Camaro roared happily as they hit the main road and sped away. Even though she looked relaxed, she drove skillfully. "Where are you going? I don't know your name," Malcolm asked, wincing as he watched her drive. "I'm taking you to the hospital. My name is Jessica, Jessica Ann Robertson. And you are?" Jessica is a beautiful name for a goddess, he thought, feeling tired and his vision fading. He struggled to respond. "I'm Malcolm Harris. My friends call me Mel." He wanted to say more, but his thoughts became unclear. Darkness started to take over, and soon he could only see and hear a blur of blackness and faint sounds. Then there was complete silence and deep darkness. The next moment, his daydream was broken by the waitress asking if he wanted another drink. He nodded, and she walked away. He stared after her, his mind drifting back to thoughts of his wife. He asked her if she was okay, but she pretended she was fine. He could tell she was not being honest. Maybe she realized there was a problem, but she didn't know how to fix it. This wasn't the first time they faced an issue, but it was the first time he didn't know what it was. He didn't know how to help. If she wanted to talk, they could figure it out together. As Malcolm drank the rest of his beer, many thoughts spun in his mind. He usually didn't drink and rarely came to bars, but the last few weeks at home had been tough. He and Jessie had been trying to stay cheerful, but the weight of their problems loomed over them. Finishing his drink, Malcolm looked around the quiet bar where he had come to think. It wasn't a place he liked to go. At least it was calm. The music from the jukebox was light and soft, not too loud. The lighting was dim but not too dark, and no one seemed to notice the stranger sitting alone at a table in the corner. The bar was off to the side, and that was another reason he chose this place. Malcolm didn't want anyone he knew to come up and ask questions. There were only a few people in the bar, mostly older men who seemed like regulars. He saw how friendly they were with each other. A few women, besides the waitress who didn't bring him a drink, were sitting at the bar, chatting away. They weren't dressed too fancy, just professional. They looked like office workers enjoying a break, having a few drinks and talking about their day before heading home to their partners or pets. "Here you go," the waitress said, placing a new bottle of beer in front of him and taking away the empty one. "That'll be $2, she added cheerfully. Malcolm turned in his chair to reach for his wallet. He pulled out a 10 and handed it to her. "Bring me another one and keep the change, please." "Thanks, honey, I'll be right back." After she went to get his second beer, Malcolm looked around the bar again, his mood shifting slightly. Then he turned his focus back to his thoughts. Something caught his eye. He quickly glanced over at his neighbor Phyllis, sitting at a table in the corner. She wasn't alone and wasn't with her husband Henry. He didn't know who the man was, but he could tell this wasn't just a friendly meeting. He watched them, feeling uneasy about seeing his neighbor with another man. Phyllis laughed softly, and he continued to observe, trying to make sense of the scene. The man smiled and gently touched her hand, but then pulled it away. He seemed to be testing the waters, and Phyllis didn't mind this little game. The older woman looked like she was enjoying herself too, occasionally brushing her hand against his arm. Malcolm watched them for a while, unable to look away from the couple. It felt like he was watching a funny routine, but for him, it was a little sad because at that moment, Henry was at home sitting in front of a ton of sports channels. Phyllis and Henry were about the same age, both 58. The man with Phyllis looked younger but was no teenager. Phyllis wasn't exceptionally beautiful, but she had a nice figure, and even though her face showed signs of aging, a hint of her youthful charm lingered. Henry, on the other hand, was balding and overweight. He was mostly lazy and didn't move much beyond watching his sports. The man with Phyllis at the table seemed to be in better shape, probably around Malcolm's age, but this was none of Malcolm's concern. When Malcolm turned his gaze away, he noticed a second bottle of beer next to his first. He hadn't even seen the waitress come by. He was too caught up in watching the scene in front of him. Poor Henry, he thought with a wry smile, but his amusement turned to a sad frown as his own troubles came rushing back. Malcolm thought about telling Henry what his wife was up to, but quickly pushed the idea aside. This wasn't his place to intervene, and he didn't want to mess things up. Maybe Phyllis and Henry had some understanding between them. He had enough of his own worries as he finished his second beer. Suddenly, he felt the need to visit the restroom, not being used to drinking so much. He glanced at Phyllis one last time, hoping she wouldn't notice him. She had moved closer to the man and stood with her back to him, washing her hands. He caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror above the sink and saw a face that had changed over the years. He wouldn't say he was ugly, but he certainly wasn't handsome. During a factory accident, he had been lucky enough to escape the flames, but some fiery bits had still hit him. It hadn't left a severe mark, but it was noticeable. While plastic surgery had helped fix most of his injuries, some discoloration and tiny scars were still there. His hair, once a deep brown, now had more gray mixed in. The more he looked at his face, the more it felt like he was seeing a stranger. His dark brown eyes reflected something deeper inside him, and he couldn't figure out what it was. As he wiped his hands, he felt a growing dislike for the person staring back at him in the mirror. He quickly looked down, his eyes drawn to the floor. What used to be a nice tile floor was now covered in years of grime, dark spots, and bits of torn paper towels. These brown towels were the stiff, rough kind that didn't dry his hands very well. Seeing that mess made him think about his marriage. It felt just like that dirty floor, filled with stains and scraps. I need to get home, talk to Jessie, and fix our marriage, he thought. Then images of Phyllis and her partner, along with Henry, popped into his head more clearly than he wanted. He realized he and Jessie had become so used to each other that their relationship had turned into a routine. No wonder Jessie was acting differently. He remembered an old saying, familiarity breeds contempt. He didn't know who first said it, but it made sense, even if it sounded a bit harsh. That thought explained a lot, including the look of disappointment she had shown him last Saturday night. He felt a spark of happiness as he figured out this puzzle in his mind. He smiled, and even looking in the mirror felt a little easier than before. Feeling pleased with himself, he hummed a cheerful tune and stepped out of the bathroom, ready to sit back down at the table. As he glanced around, he spotted Phyllis and her partner at another table, but they had company. He could recognize Phyllis easily. She was back in her usual chair while the new woman stood with her back to him. He also noticed a new man who looked a bit like Phyllis's partner. Not that they looked the same, but their faces shared similarities, as did their ages and styles. This is getting interesting, Malcolm thought. I wonder who this new woman is. He sat down and took a sip of his beer, watching the two couples laugh and enjoy each other's company. He found it amusing, trying to guess who the new woman might be. Could it be Doris Cully from down the street? She had the right height, and her simple hairstyle was similar too. Or maybe it was Heather Letts, who was also about the same height. The only difference was that her hair was shorter, so it couldn't be Heather. Could it be Lynette Franklin, the president of the local school board? Now, that would be strange. She was very religious and would never be in a place like this. She would definitely never be seen with a man who wasn't her husband. Tired of guessing, he turned in his seat to look at the table and noticed his beer was gone. He thought about leaving, but glanced at his watch and decided it was too early to go home. He realized he had forgotten to check for messages at home, which he could have done on his cell phone. If Jessie was late getting off work again, she would call the home phone. Until a couple of years ago, she always called him on his cell phone. Yeah, I'll call home and see if Jessie left a message about being late. If she did, I might have time for one more, he thought. And sure enough, Jessie had left a message saying she would be late and that he didn't need to worry about dinner since she would grab a snack on her way home. I wanted to talk to her about things, but I guess that will have to wait. With a sigh, he closed his phone and put it back in his pocket. He waved to the waitress and ordered another beer. Now that it was evening, the place was busier. The noise from people talking was a little louder, but it was still okay. At least the jukebox wasn't playing any louder than before. Sipping his third mug of beer, he felt more relaxed and began to understand what the problem in his marriage was. The sooner he talked to Jessie about it, the sooner they could start fixing things. It might be tough, but he loved her, and as hard as it would be worth it. Feeling better, he sat quietly, finishing his beer and listening to the chatter around him. Phyllis, the two men, and the woman he didn't know were getting louder as the night went on. I guess drinking makes things more fun, Malcolm thought. Not my kind of fun, but that's okay. Then he heard chairs scraping from the direction of the two couples. His curiosity got the better of him, and he turned to see the couples. Yes, they were getting up and seemed ready to leave. The man with Phyllis had his hand on her back, guiding her toward the door. Malcolm raised an eyebrow in surprise, even though he had already suspected they were close. This felt more real than just a suspicion. He thought again. Poor Henry. He shifted his attention to the other woman who was still facing him. He saw the man put his hands on her waist and talk to her, their faces very close. With a strange mix of anticipation, Malcolm waited for the woman to turn towards him. She seemed familiar, but her clothes and behavior puzzled him. He just couldn't figure out who she was. She finally turned around, and he stopped wondering who this mysterious woman was. As soon as he realized who she was, she recognized him too at the same moment. "Malcolm? Is that you?" she said, surprised but friendly. Malcolm couldn't believe his eyes, and seeing her wiped away his earlier worries about his and Jessie's problem. "Yes, it's me," he said, feeling breathless as she stepped closer. He thought he saw a hint of pity in her eyes, and that made a long-buried anger rise up inside him. "That's what I thought. But why are you here? Where's Jessica?" he asked, though her tone didn't seem too shy. There was a mix of doubt and tension in her voice, as if she wanted to enjoy herself. "Well, I don't think I had as much fun as you since I'm alone," he replied with a touch of sarcasm. "Malcolm, listen. Things aren't what they seem. They aren't like they used to be," she started, but he cut her off. "Things aren't what they seem with you. It's been 23 years and you haven't changed at all." "Okay, Malcolm, I can see you're upset," she said, her own anger rising. "I don't understand why. It's not like I've ever really hurt you. I just wanted to have a little fun tonight." "Yeah, right. That's fine. I'm leaving," he said angrily, walking past her and her surprised friend. He wished she would say something, anything, but she just pressed her lips together and narrowed her eyes, holding back her own anger, leaving him to feel alone. He felt a bit better but wished she had spoke up so he could share his feelings too. "I knew things would go wrong between Jessie and me, but not like this," he thought, cursing himself as he stepped out of the bar. That lying woman. He wasn't sure who he meant, her or his wife. As he drove home, a storm of anger grew inside him, building with every mile until he felt a burning rage. By the time he reached home around 10 o'clock, Jessie's car was missing, which meant she wasn't back yet. This was good, as he didn't want to see her right now. He entered the house, went to the living room, and grabbed a bottle of Jack Daniels from the cabinet. Then he wandered into the living room, settled into an armchair and took a drink, waiting for his wife to come home. His mind raced with half-finished thoughts, one disappearing before he could really think about it. Except for one. It came up again and again. Why had she looked at him with pity? Was it because of him or something from the past? Malcolm, who usually didn't drink, soon felt tipsy and a bit sleepy. He fell asleep and woke up only when he heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Since the small room was partly under the stairs, the sound of footsteps echoed inside. He was still not tipsy enough for what lay ahead, but he didn't want to drink more. Malcolm got up from his chair and walked upstairs to see his wife. He entered the bedroom and said, "When were you going to tell me?" Malcolm's voice was tense, holding back his anger. Jessie was startled by the sudden tone and turned to him with wide eyes. Her face showed shock and a hint of fear. "What are you talking about, Malcolm?" she asked, her voice shaking just a little. "You know what I mean, so don't play dumb with me." "Malcolm, I can't read minds." "Until you explain what you mean, I have no idea," Jessie replied, her surprise turning to annoyance. "Okay, I'll tell you, since you want to act like this tonight. I saw Claire, your sister. Do you remember her?" Malcolm said, his voice sharp. "Oh." Jessie looked surprised, her expression changing to one of relief that Malcolm noticed, but it seemed too sudden for him. "Yeah. How long has she been back? Why didn't you tell me?" Malcolm raised his voice a bit. "I didn't know! Why didn't you ask her?" Jessie shouted back, anger replacing her shock. "And when did you see her?" Confused by the change in the conversation and worried about Jessie's clear anger, Malcolm took a moment to collect himself. He tried to stay calm as he answered. "I was outside having a few beers. I saw her where I was drinking. Now that I think about it, I guess you can smell the whiskey on me." "You've been drinking? Since when?" Jessica asked, surprised about Malcolm's behavior. "Just tonight at a bar. I'm home now," Malcolm replied, then continued. "But you are sidestepping my questions. I need you to answer me." Jessie shook her head in disbelief, trying to understand the look in Malcolm's eyes. Was there more to his anger than just Claire's visit? For the first time, she felt a stranger looking back at her. A chill went through her, realizing she might not know her husband as well as she thought, and that worried her. She shot him a stern look that usually made him back down, but this time he held her gaze without flinching, something he never would have done before. He would have looked away by now, a shy smile on his face, and he would have laughed. But not this time. She didn't recognize the man in front of her, and it made her anxious. So instead of arguing, she chose to reply. "I'm sorry, Malcolm. I really don't know the answers to your questions. We haven't talked much, but I learned a couple of weeks ago that Claire was back. I asked her the same questions, but she avoided my questions. You can't let the past take control of you. I know you're upset about what happened when she lived here, but that was so long ago. We need to move on." Then, with a hint of sadness, she added, "I thought we had moved on already." He looked closely at her, studying her face and eyes, then let out a sound that could mean anything. He walked out of the room. She had seen Malcolm like this before, angry and filled with hate. It had been 23 years ago, but this time felt different. It was as if he didn't trust her. She thought to herself, anger started to rise in her again, but it wasn't strong enough to push away the uneasy feeling he had left her with. And it scared her. Goodness! Does he really know more than he's letting on? Is he testing me to see how I'll respond? Then she realized that if that was true, he knew she hadn't been honest. Suddenly, she became very afraid of the man she loved and called her husband. "Hey, boy. What's up, Mal?" one of the technicians asked as he saw Malcolm walking by, checking the shiny steel rollers around the gears and belts. Malcolm waved his hand to show he heard, but instead of stopping to chat like he usually did, he kept going with his inspection. "Dude, what's up with him? Is he really that focused?" The technician who greeted Malcolm asked another worker nearby, shrugging his shoulders. The second technician replied, "Who knows? But whatever it is, I've never seen an old man so intense with his work that he didn't stop for a moment." "Yeah, he must be," said the first technician, and they both returned to their tasks. Soon, they forgot all about Malcolm's odd behavior. "Okay, Bruce, I've walked the line and everything looks good. We don't need any big repairs. Regular maintenance will carry us through the summer. Just to be safe, have the maintenance team order 2 more 8-foot sections, 1 double-sided spacer, and 1 right-side sweep. I think that should keep us covered." Malcolm told his partner and longtime friend, Eric Bruce. "That's a good thing. The less we spend on repairs, the more we save, and the sooner we can start updating the plant. It's about time we did this. We'll start next month, and I think it will take about a year to finish all the upgrades and fixes. Eric said we were getting more orders than we could handle with our current setup. Hiring more people didn't seem to make sense since our machines were already working at full capacity. Eric was explaining this more to himself than to Malcolm. You're right, Eric, but that means we might have to wait another year before we can go to market. We need to make sure everything is running well first. He understood the situation, but they didn't really have a choice. If they couldn't keep up with current production and expand their capacity significantly, they wouldn't impress anyone, and they might not find any buyers for their initial product. They wanted to not only create interest in their product, but also set a high starting price. As Eric spoke, he stood up and walked to the small counter where a big coffee maker sat. He poured himself a cup of coffee, which he liked black. He had gotten used to it from his time in the army, where he sometimes had to manage without sugar or cream. Malcolm eyed Eric's coffee carefully, as if it might be harmful. Okay, I'll leave the business side to you. We'll do what you've shown me. He had known Eric since their military days, and he still couldn't understand why Eric chose to drink his coffee black. It made him cringe. To Malcolm, this habit, along with Eric's other quirks, made him think Eric was just pretending to be sophisticated. After all, everyone knew a little sugar makes coffee taste better, a true pleasure of modern life. Great! I have one more meeting with the bank, and I should finish that financial report before then, Eric said, already back at his desk and typing. Yeah, better you than me, my friend. I guess I'll go check out Jeremy Schneider's warehouse. He might have something useful among all the stuff he's collected. Plus, he usually doesn't charge too much, Malcolm said as he left Eric's office. Whatever Eric replied was drowned out by the noise of the machines and other sounds in the factory. In the next chapter, he met with Schneider for a while, looked at what he had for sale, and negotiated like only true Southerners could, mixing his offers with funny stories. These negotiations could be long and sometimes tiring. Weaker men might give in too early, agreeing to the last offer, only to discover the items had gone back to their original price, or worse, were no longer available. No one thought much about the time spent bargaining. That was just how things were. As dusk settled into a lovely purple, he drove home. Jessica's car was parked in the driveway, which meant she didn't have to work late today. That could be good or bad, but Malcolm would only find out when he walked into the house and saw what kind of mood his wife was in. Her mood didn't matter much to him since his own had changed as soon as he saw her car. He had hoped to rest, sort out his paperwork, take a shower, and get to bed before she showed up. Malcolm wasn't a gambler, but his father liked to place bets, though he never bet on horses. His mother would sometimes be in a surprisingly good mood. He entered the house through the kitchen because it was the first place he preferred to be when coming home. The front door led to the living room and other tidy spaces that were always kept neat for guests, especially if they arrived unexpectedly. The kitchen, however, was the heart of the home. It showed what life was really like at any time. Malcolm liked to know the truth about things. He went upstairs, looking for her in their bedroom and other rooms, but she was nowhere to be found. Standing by the window in one of the back rooms, he gazed out into the backyard. He couldn't see Jessie anywhere. Oh well, he thought. Maybe tonight wouldn't be so bad after all. He shouldn't have been mad at Jessie, but her sister Claire had always seemed tricky and manipulative. Jessie, being Claire's sister, had once let her influence her, putting a strain on their marriage. This had happened during their first year of marriage, which Malcolm had thought would be blissful. Claire was almost 8 years younger than Jessie. Even at a young age, Claire had the strong will of someone much older. This often caused trouble for her family, but that particular day was the worst, and it was the last time he saw Claire. They were at Jessie's yearly family gathering, and it was the first time Malcolm attended as Jessie's husband. He had gone to a few before as her boyfriend, but being her husband made it feel more special. He arrived at the reunion with pride and a sense of newfound maturity. He spent time with Jessie's family, mostly male cousins and uncles, along with some older women. Jessie had left him early to catch up with her relatives, even though he knew about Claire's not-so-great reputation. He thought it was just a phase. Many young women go through a time of finding themselves before settling down. As he passed by, he noticed the younger cousins whispering together. He clearly heard Jessie's name mentioned and felt curious but tried to stay calm. He paused and moved closer, making sure his back was turned to them so they wouldn't notice him. Malcolm didn't need to worry. The girls were so wrapped up in their quiet talk that they hadn't thought to check if anyone was listening. He could hear their whispers easily now, even over the chatter in the room. His ears and mind were focused on their quiet talk, but it was just girls chatting. He found their conversation a little funny and was about to walk away when he heard something else. I can't believe Claire is dragging her sister into this. Right? Who would make their married sister agree to something like that? They all laughed together. Claire. After a brief moment of giggling, another girl spoke up. Where are they going to do it? By the old oak tree, I heard, one girl said, looking worried. But Claire might just be trying to confuse us. They could be by the creek. Another girl replied, clearly upset by Claire's trick. Are they really going to do that? A new voice chimed in. Yes, they are. I don't know how Claire persuaded Jessica to go along with it, but it's happening. Malcolm couldn't help but wonder what they meant. What are they talking about? He thought. He was curious about what kind of trouble Claire got Jessica into. Though Jessica was strong-willed, Malcolm knew Claire had a way of charming anyone, even if they were in a bad mood. He just didn't want Jessica to be pulled into her sister's games. After hearing enough, Malcolm looked around. He knew both places they mentioned from family gatherings. He and Jessie had visited both spots a few times, and he smiled at the memory of why they went alone. The land belonged to Jessie's grandfather, but it was open to all family members. They had taken the chance to enjoy it more than once, trying to hide their laughter. Malcolm set out to find his wandering wife and troublesome sister-in-law. They were not at the oak tree. Feeling a bit rushed, he started walking toward the creek, which flowed gently about a mile away. He immersed himself in nature's sights and sounds, enjoying memories of Jessie with him. He didn't pay much attention until he was almost at the creek. Then he heard a voice. Come on, I need you. Hurry up. I've been waiting for this. It was Claire's voice, but who was she with? He could hear a man talking, but it was hard to make out what he said. Malcolm knew it wasn't his place to judge, but he wondered how Jessie fit into all this. Not wanting to eavesdrop on his sister-in-law and her companion, Malcolm started to quietly step away. Suddenly, he heard Jessica's voice. You have to get over it. He won't make a move unless you do. Your stupid husband won't know anything, so let's just hurry back. What? Malcolm yelled, and in a split second, all his calm thoughts vanished, replaced by a wave of anger. Instead of stepping back, he broke into a run, pushing through the thick bushes by the creek. Malcolm stumbled upon a scene that he would never forget. The first person he spotted was Claire. She was standing over a guy lying on the ground. Just a few feet away, Jessie was sitting on another guy's lap. What was going on? Anger surged through him. How could you do this to me? And you? What a lowlife! Everyone could see the anger on his face and the fire in his eyes. No one doubted that he was genuinely upset. The next scene was Jessica. Jessica, wait! Shouted her friend Phyllis as Jessie walked out of the store. Jessica paused and turned to see the out-of-breath woman coming toward her. I'm so glad I found you, Phyllis panted. I meant to call, but I've been swamped. Hi, Phyllis. Are you okay? How's Henry? The kids? Jessica asked with worry in her voice. Yes, Henry's fine. You know him, always the same. If he's not at work, he's at home in front of the TV. The kids are great. Junior just got a new job as assistant manager. He'll have his own place soon. And Virginia is 5 months pregnant. I'm going to be a grandmother again, Phyllis squeaked with excitement. Oh, that's nice, but you didn't shout my name just to share news about Henry and the kids, Jessica said. No, Phyllis smiled, noticing Jessica's irritation. I wanted to tell you I saw Mel at Brewster's the other night, but before you think too much, he was alone, just having a drink. Phyllis looked at Jessica, expecting a reaction. Is everything okay with you two? Jessica paused for a moment before replying, Yes, everything is fine, thanks for asking, but I really need to go, she added quietly. Okay, I was just asking because Phyllis started. Sorry, Phyllis, I'm in a hurry. We can talk later, Jessica interrupted, not letting Phyllis finish. As she walked away, Phyllis called after her. I heard Mel talking to Claire, just thought you should know. Jessica could hear the excitement in Phyllis's voice, and it made her even more upset. Despite being friends since high school, she and Phyllis had always been a bit competitive. Even though they had a friendly rivalry, there were times when their arguments could get heated. Jessica knew that for Phyllis, their marriages were just another contest in a time when divorces were common. Any couple whose marriage lasted more than a few years was seen as unusual and open to competition. Because of this, everyone nearby knew that Phyllis would never leave Henry, no matter what he did. Still, Phyllis sometimes stepped out of the house. Jessie turned around to Phyllis, flicking her long hair back, and said, "Thanks for telling me, dear. But I want to know if Mel saw you sitting alone at Brewster's. You know my husband. He is honest and doesn't like anyone getting too close. But I bet you feel perfectly fine while Mel and Henry are chatting because you must have been all by yourself." Just like Mel, smiling widely. Jessica turned and walked away, but not before noticing Phyllis blush. Then worry and anger crossed her face. Phyllis might not chase a divorce, but that didn't mean Henry wouldn't. That thought made Jessica smile even bigger, feeling a bit mischievous. If Jessie could hear what Phyllis was mumbling, she might not look so pleased. "You're such a horrible person. I know what you've been up to. Maybe Mel will find out soon, too." In the next part, Malcolm returned to Brewster's. He wasn't sure if Jessie was home or not, but if she was, he hoped she'd be busy. Yesterday's meeting had left him puzzled. Something about Jessie's actions made him uneasy. Alarm bells were ringing in his head. Her whole attitude felt both strange and a bit familiar. A worried thought suddenly crossed his mind, something Malcolm wished he didn't have to think about. Is Jessica really being unfaithful? His mind refused to accept it, but deep down he felt something wasn't right. Malcolm couldn't point to one exact moment, but all the little signs added up. "What have you done, Jessie?" his mind shouted. A waitress carrying a tray of empty plates came up to him. "Hey! Back again? Good to see you. What can I get you?" The same waitress from the night before. A smile spread across his face at how friendly she was. Malcolm asked if she remembered his order from last night. "Of course. I'll be back with 2 beers, she replied, still smiling. Malcolm looked around the bar. It was still early, and it was quiet. The same men from yesterday sat in their usual spots. They had been talking animatedly, but they quieted down when he walked by. In one booth, a couple sat chatting softly. He didn't remember seeing them the night before. A woman was sitting in one of the booths, but it was a bit too dark for Malcolm to see her clearly. He walked back to the same table as before and sat down, waiting for the waitress to bring him a beer. He got lost in his own thoughts and didn't notice the woman as she walked up to his table. "Can I join you, Malcolm?" she asked, surprising him by using his name. "Claire, what do you want?" Malcolm said, sighing. "I just want to talk, that's all," Claire replied quietly. "I don't have anything to say to you. I'm sure you don't want to hear from me either, so please leave," Malcolm said firmly. "I will leave once you listen to me," she insisted. "I said no. Why can't you understand that?" Malcolm replied, growing more frustrated. "Listen, you rude and arrogant person, you pushed me away once. But that was a long time ago, and I'm not scared anymore. If you won't hear me out, enough! If it's not your sister, then it's her friend, and now it's you. Why do women always cause trouble?" Malcolm shouted, losing his patience. "Just leave me alone. It's been over 20 years. What's another 20 years? Claire stared at him, her eyes filled with anger. "I was just 17. Ever since you saved that precious girl, my parents treated everything you said like it was truth. I had to leave home and stay in a place for girls because I was scared. I never fought back. But that scared girl is gone now, thanks to you. I lost any chance at my inheritance. All I got when my parents died was a death certificate." Claire paused, catching her breath while Malcolm stood there, shocked by her words. He hadn't known what her parents had done to her. He always thought she had run away, a thought Jessie had encouraged. "And by the way, what I do is my business, not yours or anyone else's. So don't judge me," she added strongly. At that moment, the waitress arrived with Malcolm's beer. "Here you go," she said sweetly. Turning to Claire, the waitress asked, "What can I get you?" Claire looked at the waitress with anger. "Nothing," she snapped. Malcolm quickly stopped his sister-in-law before she could kick them out. He said she could have one of his beers and asked her to hand him the other one. He gave the waitress a $20 bill and told her to keep the change with a raised eyebrow. The waitress smiled at Malcolm and said she'd be back soon with another beer. "I don't want you to," Claire said, but Malcolm replied, "Sit down, Claire. Mind your manners before we get kicked out. Just drink that beer." Malcolm ordered and took a big gulp from his mug. He looked at Claire. Well, are you just going to stand there? Look around, everyone is staring at you. I think they're waiting for another show. Claire felt embarrassed by all the attention in the quiet room. She finally sat down but didn't grab the beer. Seeing his hopeful look, Claire said firmly, I'm not going to drink with you. Malcolm shrugged and said, Suit yourself. After a moment of silence, Malcolm tried to ease the tension. So, what did you want to say earlier? Claire frowned. Now you want to talk? Talk or don't talk, I don't care, Malcolm said, feeling relieved as he took another sip of beer. When Claire stayed quiet, he added, I had no idea what happened to you. Jessie just said you went to live with some aunt. I believed her, so either you're lying or Jessie and your family have been lying all this time. Which is it? Forget you, Claire said, clenching her teeth. Wow, what a nasty mouth you have. Are you trying to upset me? He asked. This is your last chance to speak. Once I finish this beer, I'm leaving. He tipped the bottle and drank until there was almost nothing left. The silence went on until Malcolm finished his drink and put the bottle down. He pushed back his chair to stand up. Wait, Claire said loudly. I think you need to hear something. He sat back down. Okay, I'm listening. Claire looked around the room before taking a sip from her beer. I'm not going to beat around the bush. Jessie is cheating on you. Malcolm just sat there, blinking as he processed her words. Okay, he said quietly. Claire's eyes grew wide. That's all you have to say? Good. What else was I supposed to say? Don't you care? At that moment, a waitress hurried past, putting his beer in front of him before rushing back to the bar. It was clear she wanted no part in their argument. Picking up the bottle, Malcolm took a loud sip. Do I care? I think you do. The only problem is I only have your word that she's being unfaithful. Do you have any proof? Claire looked at Malcolm for a moment before replying. No, I don't. Claire still had her beer in her hand and took another sip while watching her brother-in-law closely. Just her words. What? You mean Jessie told you she was unfaithful? Just like that? Nodding, Claire replied, Yes. Leaning back in his chair, Malcolm shook his head slowly, as if trying to clear it of what he had just heard. When did you talk to Jessie? When she said she was unfaithful? Rethinking her answer while sipping her beer, Claire frowned slightly. A couple weeks ago, I can't remember the exact day. It was probably Monday or Tuesday. We were having lunch and I could tell she was upset. After all, she is my sister. So I kept pressing her until she admitted it. Before you ask for details, she didn't tell me much, just that she was involved with someone else. Malcolm stared at Claire, looking very serious. What? Why are you looking at me like that? I told you because I thought you should know. She's my sister. But I won't take the blame for this again. What do you mean? Malcolm asked calmly. What do I mean? Claire replied a bit impatiently. That you're not going to blame yourself again. She has been unfaithful to me before. Claire took a sip of her beer, looking at Malcolm. Shrugging, she said, Didn't you know? Why do you think I had to leave? It wasn't just your complaints. Jessica also pushed to have me sent away. She was worried I would tell others. After taking another drink, she said, I thought you would have figured this out by now. Shaking his head, Malcolm asked, What are you talking about? What was I supposed to understand? Claire stared at him, wide-eyed, for several seconds. Oh my God, you really don't understand. You didn't know. Just answer me. Has Jessie really been unfaithful to me up to now? Suddenly, Claire's eyes softened, and she spoke quietly. I'm sorry, Malcolm. Maybe this wasn't the best idea. Grabbing her purse, she stood up. I'd better go. Malcolm watched Claire as she moved through the crowd of people in the bar. He quickly followed her as she headed for the door. Claire! Malcolm called out, rushing to catch up with her. Wait! But Claire ignored him and pressed the button to unlock her car. She felt like running away. She wasn't sure why she had come to the bar to talk to Malcolm. She hoped he would finally see the wrongs his wife had done over the years. As soon as she got into the car, Malcolm grabbed her arm tightly. Wait a minute, Claire. You can't just tell me about Jessie and walk away. You still haven't answered my question. What's going on? He asked firmly. Let me go. I have to leave, Claire pleaded. Not until you tell me what's happening. If Jess has been unfaithful, I need to know. I have a right to know. Claire looked at Malcolm with uncertainty before making up her mind. Years of bottled-up feelings bubbled to the surface. She let it all out. Fine. You want the whole truth? Here it is. Yes, she was unfaithful. She was with someone else that day at the family gathering and continued until Ian moved out. Who do you think suggested sneaking away? I agreed to it because she promised I could have a chance with Ian's friend when you found out. That's exactly what happened. Malcolm was shocked by the harshness of her words and could only stare at her in disbelief. Claire, barely able to catch her breath, carried on, unable to hold back the ugly truth she had kept inside for too long. Do you want more? There's a strong chance that your children aren't really yours. Does that answer your questions? Does it satisfy your need for the truth? You're lying! You're just jealous of your sister! Malcolm shouted, struggling to accept what Claire had just said. But deep inside, he felt his doubts growing stronger, transforming into a small fire that was hard to ignore. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't face what Claire had revealed. He realized that accepting it meant confronting something he dreaded. Seeing the change in his face, Claire felt a wave of sadness for him. She had not known him well, but she had imagined this moment for years. The satisfaction she might have felt at his pain was softened by the fact that he was just as much a victim of her sister's choices as she was. I'm sorry, Malcolm. I didn't mean to say all this. I have to go. Overcome with emotion, she pulled away from him and jumped into her car. As she drove off, she looked back to see him standing there with a blank look on his face. No, he didn't seem indifferent. He seemed lost, like a little boy abandoned in an unfamiliar place. Barely whispering, Claire said, I'm sorry. She wasn't sure if she was apologizing to herself, to Malcolm, or for both of them. In the next moment, Malcolm realized where he was. He knew how he got there, but until now he hadn't cared. Even now he didn't care much, though his mind was trying to seem concerned. This was the roughest part of the city, filled with empty, run-down houses, boarded-up buildings, cracked sidewalks, and littered streets. Small groups of people gathered in the shadows of what used to be busy streets. Some tougher individuals moved quickly from place to place, likely armed. Overall, the atmosphere was grim, filled with an unsettling gloom that felt darker than it should. He didn't give much thought to his own safety. Malcolm drove his truck slowly and parked next to the broken curb. He turned off the engine and rested his head on the steering wheel, trying to calm his troubled mind and hurting heart. Was Claire being honest? Had he been tricked all these years? Were Trisha and Jackson really someone else's children? These painful questions swarmed in his mind, and he felt overwhelmed. No answers came to him. Small memories floated in and out of his thoughts, each seeming meaningless on its own. But when he pieced them together, they made his worries grow stronger. Did his friends know anything? Would they be honest? Would they answer his questions, or would they avoid him and show guilt? Who could he go to? For years, Malcolm had depended on his friends, and they had relied on him. But could he still trust them now? No. He realized he couldn't trust his friends. This surprised Malcolm deeply. He felt lost, filled with sadness and bitterness like he had never felt before. His thoughts drifted to his business partner, Eric. Should he talk to Eric? Did Eric know anything already? Normally, Malcolm kept his personal problems separate from work, but now he wasn't sure. Still, he needed to talk to someone. He had to find out if his friends were aware of everything from the start. Just as he shifted the truck into gear to drive away, he heard a loud knock on his window. He turned to see 3 young men standing outside. They wore dark clothes with a style that was trendy. Their caps were tilted at strange angles. Malcolm noticed they all wore similar colors, which made him uneasy. It seemed like they might be part of a gang. He also saw that they were holding large handguns loosely by their sides. Great, he thought, as they approached him while he was lost in his thoughts. He should have felt scared. He knew he was in danger and that these strangers had control over him. But instead, he felt a rush of excitement. Adrenaline pumped through him, and everything felt slow and strange. He felt himself grab for his gun. He lifted it in one quick move, and with his other hand, he pushed the button to lower the window. His body moved automatically as if on its own. As the window slid down, his gun came into view for the 3 young men. Hey guys, I'm having a really tough night. I need to let off some steam. You all are going to help me with that. What are you going to do? Their shock was complete. They thought they would find a scared, weak person. Instead, they faced an angry, armed man. I'll take you down! shouted a young guy, sounding brave as he raised his gun. Go ahead, Malcolm replied in a calm but chilling voice. Hey, Drydle, he's serious. I've seen that look before. He's dangerous. Let's get out of here. No way, shouted another. We're not running from anyone, especially not from an old guy. Drydle! As the loud bang of a gunshot echoed, the gun the young man named Drydle held flew from his hand, landing on the street. Drydle's hand shook. Oh no, cried one of his friends. I told you he was dangerous. Drydle, if you care about your life, listen to your friend and walk away. The next shot will hit. Malcolm's expression changed completely. It turned as cold as ice, his anger boiling within him. His friend's worried voice made Drydle look up. The old man was no longer calm. He seemed ready to act. Drydle let his friends pull him away from Malcolm, still glancing back, fearing the gun could go off at any moment. He thought about threatening the old man, but one look from him changed his mind. The man's face was full of anger, and he held the gun steadily, aimed right at Drydle. Drydle didn't know who this man was, but he planned to find out. Dre, leave him alone, one friend shouted. He'll take you down if you don't. I saw his look. He's not joking. We picked the wrong moment, and he won't forget us. This man is trouble. Meanwhile, the doorbell rang loudly, followed by urgent knocking. Eric jumped from bed, grabbed his pistol, and crept to the door. Looking through the peephole, he saw his friend, and his worry turned to irritation. Still, he knew Malcolm wouldn't be knocking so loudly unless something serious was wrong. What's going on at this hour? Eric asked, concerned. Is everything okay? Did something happen to Jessica? You could say that, Malcolm replied. Can I come in? Sure, come in. What's happening, Mel? Do you want a drink? A beer would be nice, Malcolm replied, ignoring Eric's questions. Malcolm looked closely at Mel and decided his friend wasn't drunk. Eric nodded. I think we should head to the kitchen. Would you like some coffee? He remembered how Eric made coffee, but Malcolm quickly said, No thanks, a beer is fine. You settle in. Malcolm sat at the kitchen table with a beer in his hand and glanced around. I never noticed before, but you have a nice kitchen. Thanks. Now let's get to the point. Are you and Jessica having issues? Did she ask you to leave? Eric took a sip from his beer mug, a fancy one Malcolm had never tried, but it tasted better than he expected. Before Eric could express his thoughts, Malcolm shared what Claire had told him. He added, And another thing, I had a big fight with a guy tonight. You did what? Eric said, clearly shocked. Did you hurt someone? Who? No, it's not him that Jess is with, at least I don't think so. At Eric's urging, Malcolm shared what happened. Wow, Mal, what if that guy goes to the police? I'm sure he got my truck's license plate. As he finished the last sip of his beer, Malcolm shrugged. I doubt he'll call the police. He doesn't seem like the type. Eric stood up and went to the fridge for 2 more bottles. Maybe so, but what if he comes after you? Eric, have you ever known me to be scared of things like this? No, but that's what I'm worried about. What if he does come for you? Malcolm cut in. Then I'll handle it, and you could end up in serious trouble for helping me. You could go to prison for a long time. Yeah, maybe, Malcolm said, sounding uninterested. He sighed and added, You know what? I think I'm going to skip that second beer. I'm heading home to sleep. Thanks for listening. You're a great friend. As Malcolm stood up, Eric had an idea. Hey, why not stay here tonight? It's a long drive home and you look worn out. Malcolm thought for a moment. Yes, he was tired, and he had probably had too much to drink to drive safely. The offer sounded nice, but no, he would feel better in his own home. Thanks for the offer, Eric. I really appreciate it, but I need to go home. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? Just don't do anything reckless. Stay safe. Okay. I know how I can be sometimes, Eric. With a sad smile, Malcolm gave his friend a pat on the shoulder and stepped out of the kitchen. Eric stepped outside a short while later, but Malcolm had already left the house and locked the door behind him. Eric thought about how Malcolm's marriage ending would affect him. When Eric and Malcolm started their business, he had heard whispers about Jessica. He ignored the talk until he saw Jessica with another man walking through the parking lot of a fancy condo. They stopped so the man could use a card to open the front doors and went inside one of the buildings. The two of them had their arms around each other, After working with Malcolm for 12 years and knowing Jessica, Eric was sure of what he saw and who it involved. It wasn't hard to guess what was happening between Jessica and her companion. This troubled Eric a lot. He tried to tell Malcolm what he had seen, but each time he hesitated. He worried about what everyone in town believed would happen if Malcolm found out about his wife's unfaithfulness. People would think the cheating wife and her partner were in danger, and the angry husband would end up in trouble. That's why he felt so anxious when he saw Malcolm at his door. It was why he quickly asked if Jessica was okay. He feared the worst. Now that the truth was out, it seemed Malcolm had accepted things, and it felt like just a matter of time. Eric had never met Claire. He had heard about her but didn't know her. It shocked him how quickly he came to dislike her in just a few moments. The drive home was filled with painful, mixed-up thoughts. When he finally arrived at his house, Malcolm couldn't recall how he got there. The house was dark. The driveway was empty, which meant Jessica wasn't home. At this late hour, she probably wouldn't return tonight. Maybe that's for the best, Malcolm thought. I doubt I could face her without feeling angry. With heavy footsteps and a tired heart, Malcolm walked inside and started getting ready for bed. He felt completely worn out despite the deep sadness in his heart. His body needed sleep, and he didn't care about anything else. The pain in his chest felt unending. His last thoughts before falling asleep were wild and emotional, filled with uncertainty. Is she with him? If she is, I hope I catch them together. I will make them pay. The next scene changed. What did you tell him? How could you? Jessica shouted at her sister. They were at lunch in a deli in the town's only shopping center. Claire, enjoying a twisted sense of satisfaction, revealed everything to her sister without any warning. Until that point, they had been having a nice talk. But when Jess started praising her lover, Claire lost interest. Yes, dear sister, I told him. I told him everything. And if I've ruined your life, well, welcome to my world. It's like what you and Malcolm did to me. I was just 17. I was taken away from the only home I knew. The people who were supposed to love and protect me turned their backs on me. I spent a month in that awful girls' home before I ran away. I had to learn to survive on the streets twice. It was dangerous. Jessica looked shocked and worried. I didn't know what to say. What happened? Claire asked with sarcasm, her anger rising. Then she worked to calm herself with a small sigh. Does it really matter? It was a long time ago and I'd rather forget. Jessica just nodded, though her face seemed to relax a bit. I'm alive. That's what matters, right? Jessica nodded again, her anger fading a little because of her sister's story. Listen, Jess, you need to take responsibility for this, Claire said quietly. I don't know what's going on with that guy, Ian, but it needs to stop. I don't like Malcolm very much, but I hear he takes care of you and your kids. But you know how Malcolm gets when he feels lied to. Jessica looked shocked, then scared as she thought about what her sister was implying. Claire smiled slightly, seeming pleased with herself. Yes, I know they're not Malcolm's kids. And then, to make it worse, she added, You wondering how I found out? Easy. Ian talks too much. The only reason Malcolm didn't hear about this sooner is that the people Ian was bragging to know how Malcolm can be. They didn't want to be the ones to bring him bad news. Jessica's mouth dropped open in disbelief. No, tell me you didn't tell him about the kids. Please, you can't be that cruel. Leaning closer to her sister, Claire said firmly, Cruel? Maybe. But yes, I did tell Malcolm about where your kids come from. Oh my God, why would you do that? I thought we were on the same side. You and I, we. Jessica started, but Claire interrupted angrily. We what? You thought everything was forgiven and forgotten and that we were sisters again? I'm begging you. You can't be that naive. Right, dear sister? Claire said with clear disdain. She looked closely at Jessica's pale face. Claire was surprised. Leaning back in her chair, she said, Wow, you really thought the past was behind us and that we could be the sisters we should have been. For a moment, both women sat in silence, lost in their own thoughts. Jess, I didn't come back to hurt you, I promise. It wasn't until you mentioned Ian that I lost my cool. Ian this, Ian that. The same guy you wanted before. The same guy who sent me away. It was too much, I snapped. Claire's anger flared as she spoke, her voice getting louder. She paused for a moment to collect her thoughts while Jessica sat quietly, filled with resentment. Even with all this, I still had some friends around. They kept me informed about everything, including your embarrassing stories. So yes, I knew all about the father of your kids. Ian is really something else. He couldn't keep things to himself. Thankfully, the people he talked to were smarter, so nothing he said ever reached Malcolm's ears over the years. He had no idea until you told him, Jessica said bitterly. Yes, poor guy didn't quite believe me, but he was completely speechless. Whether he believes me or not, the doubt is there now. I know he'll figure out what to do with it, Claire said with a sly laugh. Do you really dislike me that much? Do you dislike children that much? Jessica asked sadly. Dislike you? Claire replied, surprised by the question. Not anymore. I used to feel a lot of dislike for you, but I don't feel that way about your kids. For a long time, though, I held on to a lot of anger toward you. That anger kept me warm when I felt cold, fed me when I was hungry. It kept me going when I was at my lowest. I used it to endure the hardest parts of those years. It pushed me forward. It drove me to achieve things I never thought I could and to succeed beyond what I dreamed. But I'm not sure when it happened, maybe a few years ago. But I realized that anger had faded away. Jessica looked at her sister and noticed a coolness in her hazel eyes that wasn't there before. She felt a chill run down her spine, through her legs and to her toes, which were slightly numb and tingling. As it stands, I'm still angry at you. If you hadn't brought your troubles into our talks, I wouldn't have said anything. Just hearing his name takes me back to those terrible times, and it drives me mad. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I apologize for, Jessica nervously began to say. Save it for someone else, my sister. There's nothing you can say to fix what you've done to me. And yes, to Malcolm, too. He's naive, but he's a man who idolizes the very place you let him down. I feel sorry for him. He fell for your lies, just like our parents did. I felt angry at them, too. I don't feel angry at anyone now. I have my own life, and it's better than most. Claire stood up suddenly, pushing her chair back with purpose. Lunch is my treat, she said with a firm look. Unable to meet her sister's gaze, Jessica stared at her cold food and nodded in thanks. Claire moved closer to Jessica, leaned in and whispered softly, I didn't create these problems. I just brought them out into the light. What happens next depends on you and Malcolm. I'm leaving tonight and I won't be back. This is not a goodbye, it's a farewell. Jessica felt a mix of strong emotions and couldn't face her sister or react to her leaving. She was very angry at Claire for what she did, but deep down, she knew her own choices helped lead to this moment. As minutes passed, she cried quietly, trying to sort her jumbled thoughts into something that made sense. Then suddenly a clear idea came to her. She knew what she had to do. What's the next step? Malcolm shouted at the man who had once meant everything to him. I want a divorce. I know this isn't what you wish for, but... Jessica began, standing before her husband, feeling both embarrassed and shaking with anger, like a tall tree swaying in a storm. Malcolm fought to stay calm as Jessica spoke. You don't know what I want. You haven't understood me for a long time because you don't really know me. Malcolm interrupted her, his voice loud but not quite shouting. I don't know you anymore. I thought I did, but I see now I was wrong. Please, Malcolm, if you love me, just listen, Jessica begged, but he cut her off again. Love you? You're joking. After what you did, I can't believe I don't hate you even more than I do now. I will never love someone who betrays trust, and that's exactly what you did, Jessica. You betrayed me. Malcolm, how can you say that? I can, Jessica yelled, her voice shaking with shock and hurt. Listen, you need to know. I will make my own choices. If I want a divorce, I will do it. If I want to stay married and make your life difficult, I can do that too. If you resist, I'll make things hard for you and your new partner. But Malcolm, she started to say, noticing his eyes. They were filled with deep anger. She could see pain and other feelings there, but above all, there was anger. It sparkled in his eyes, making her feel tight in the chest as she looked at his face. She saw his strong jaw and his serious expression, and it hit her hard. Malcolm wasn't just talking, he meant every word. A memory flashed in her mind of a different time and place. She recalled being with her sister and two men when a furious Malcolm suddenly appeared. What is happening? How could you do this? His words echoed in her mind. She heard his shout filled with immense anger and deep pain. Before she could even turn to look at him, she knew what she would see. He was coming at them quickly before Jessica could move away. Suddenly, he was right there. Something hard struck her head. She fell to the ground but was still awake, feeling shaken. Then she saw Malcolm pulling someone towards the creek and pushing them under the water again and again. It was Ian. Ian! Oh no, Malcolm, what have you done? That was Claire's voice, filled with disbelief and fear. For some reason, in the days that followed while she was healing, Jessica had lost the memories of that day. She buried it deep inside her. Although she sometimes felt it close by, it never came back until that moment when she saw Malcolm's expression. Ian, who was saved just in time by Claire and his friends, ended up in the same hospital as Jessica. But fear kept them from talking to each other. Even though the police were looking into what happened, they never mentioned Malcolm's name. If they had, and the real story came out, Jessica and Ian would have been forced to leave town by her family. So, by chance, both Jessica and Ian agreed to say it was a swimming accident. Their stories didn't quite match, but the police believed them since their different details were normal during such a shocking experience. When Jessica was finally let out of the hospital, a quiet Malcolm came to pick her up and took her to her parents' house. He told her father that she was fine now, back in her family's care. Jessica was not telling the truth. She blamed it all on her sister, even suggesting she had been given something that made her confused, leading her to listen to Ian. With Claire's help, they worked hard to persuade her parents, and eventually Malcolm agreed to take her back. It took a long time, years really, for him to forgive her and for their relationship to heal. It was even longer before Jessica began to hear Ian out and started seeing him again. Naturally, Ian, despite being scared of Malcolm, wanted to take some kind of revenge for the blow he had received and the near drowning. And what better way than to get close to Malcolm's wife, maybe even have a child with her, or two, and all without Malcolm finding out. For Jessica, all of this had been happening for a while. She had grown used to it and found a way to accept it. But then Claire returned and changed everything. Now, facing the man she once loved, all her lies and secrets came crashing down on her. She felt shame, guilt, and regret wash over her, making it hard to breathe. She realized she couldn't keep living with her husband, nor could she continue hiding the truth. Jessica turned away from Malcolm, unable to handle his intense stare any longer. He already knew about some of her lies, but there was something else in his eyes that made her feel uneasy. She was scared that if she kept looking at him, he would discover more truths. "Okay, Malcolm. I will wait for your choice. I will follow whatever you decide," she said quietly. Feeling disappointed, Jessica murmured to herself. After a moment, Malcolm responded, "What? I can't hear you well anymore. What did you say?" Jessica felt a spark of anger. Somehow Malcolm was playing with her. His hearing was just fine, but she felt trapped into agreeing with him. She feared this was just the start of a long and difficult battle. A change was coming that Jessica had never imagined. She didn't expect it, but it was getting closer every moment. "I will follow your choice," Jessica said in a louder but shaky voice. Nodding, Malcolm calmly raised his hand and pointed at the door. "Leave. I'm allowing you to go." "What?" "I need some things, Malcolm, my clothes, my makeup," she pleaded, panic rising in her voice. "I don't care. Leave now. I'll call you when I decide," Malcolm replied, his voice as cold as ice. "Someone else can get your things later and give them to you." Jessica realized arguing wouldn't help. She was worried that if she walked past him, he might lose control and hurt her. "Thank you, Claire, and your misguided choices," she thought angrily. "And Ian, his lack of sense was something else, but you went along with him, didn't you? How foolish do you feel now?" Jessica sighed, feeling cold and small in response to giving in to Malcolm's demand. Without a second thought, she turned and walked out of the house she had lived in for more than 24 years. As she drove away, she caught a glimpse of Malcolm standing still in the rearview mirror, much like a statue in one of the windows. The sight reminded her of an old movie they had watched years ago. In that film, guests had found themselves stuck in a house because of their own thoughts. Jessica felt a chill as she wondered who was really trapped, her or Malcolm. As she left, the pain in Malcolm's heart grew stronger, almost making him double over. "Why, Jessica? Why did you do this?" Malcolm shouted, not really talking to anyone specific. He felt the need to lash out, or he thought he might explode from the pressure inside him. He knew that if he didn't let it out, he might lose his mind entirely. He stepped back from the window, a serious look on his face. "I need to find out the truth. I will discover who Jessica was with and what else is happening. I want to show Claire she is wrong." Malcolm promised himself this as he made a plan. Then he went to bed. His sleep was not very good, but he felt sure that Jessica had slept even worse. This thought made him feel a little calmer, and a small, hopeful smile crept onto his face. The next part of the story. The days after his wife left were cloudy and confusing for Malcolm. At work, he often stayed later than his partner Eric. He ate and slept, but moved through his days like a robot, barely remembering what he did. He didn't feel much emotion, except for his strong will to carry out his plan. When he wasn't at work, he focused on what he needed to do. One day, he got his first answer. A few days after he and Jessica had parted ways, the doorbell rang. It was his daughter, Tricia. "Hey, Dad, I came to see you," she said with a warm smile. This was the first time he smiled like that in days. As she walked past him into the house, she added, "I'm here to pick up some of Mom's things." Her tone was quick and sharp. Malcolm was taken aback but smiled nonetheless. "Good. I've packed some of her things. I'll help you carry them," he offered. "I can do it myself. Mom gave me a list of what I need." With those words, Tricia set off to collect her mom's belongings. Normally, Tricia was cheerful and talkative, so her current mood worried Malcolm. He knew she must be feeling a lot of stress with the separation. He shrugged off his concern and let his smile return. Malcolm went back to the kitchen to finish his lunch. As he finished, Tricia rushed in, full of energy, standing in front of him with her arms raised. "How could you, Dad?" she said angrily. Caught off guard by her upset, Malcolm could only say what popped into his head. "How could you let Mom leave?" Tricia cried, tears rolling down her cheeks. As he cleared away the dishes, he took his time and thought about her question. He realized he didn't know how to answer without giving a long explanation. He was certain Tricia wouldn't be happy with a simple answer. She would want to know everything, asking questions until she understood. In some ways, she was just like him. But Malcolm wasn't ready to share his feelings yet. He wanted to be sure about everything he knew. "Answer me, Dad," the young woman shouted, tears streaming down her face. Tricia, frustrated and confused, asked, "Are you cheating on Mom?" Malcolm turned his back to her, almost laughing at how absurd the idea was. He shook his head and turned away from the plate he was washing to look out the window. His eyes drifted to the backyard behind their house. Memories flooded back to him. It was a simple yard. The swings and toys that once filled it were gone, but he could still picture two little kids playing happily, running and laughing. Their mother was nearby, tending to her flowers with care. The happy sounds from the past faded quickly, but they lingered in his mind. "Tricia, sit down while I finish the dishes and then I'll explain," he said. "No! Daddy, Tricia began, but Malcolm felt his annoyance rise. Tricia was smart enough to know how far to push her father. So she finally sat in a chair, not pleased but unable to do much else. After a few minutes, Malcolm joined her at the table. "Would you like something to drink?" "I have some," he offered kindly. "No thanks. I just want to know why you sent Mom away." Malcolm sighed and rubbed his face before he answered. "What did your mom tell you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Tricia shook her head angrily. "She didn't say much, only that you kicked her out. I asked her for more details, but she cried and told me to ask you. So what happened that made you send her away?" Malcolm looked at Tricia and felt a sharp pain as he realized how much she looked like her mother at that age. It only made him feel worse. "Your mom has done some bad things that I cannot accept," he said firmly. "Because of what she did, our relationship has suffered. I don't want to talk about it more, so please don't ask." Tricia listened to her father's cold tone but could sense the hurt behind his words. Still, she hesitated to believe that her mom could hurt the man she loved. "Mom wouldn't do anything to hurt you, Dad. I know she can be tough and stubborn, but she's not cruel." "Maybe you're feeling more hurt than you realize." "And you might have misunderstood what she said," Tricia said with hope in her voice. "No, Tricia. Your mom hurt me, whether she meant to or not. Some people can forgive their partners for mistakes, but I can't," Malcolm replied. He gave his daughter a stiff smile, trying to ease the sadness in his tone. Then he changed his smile to a warmer one and asked, "Did you get what you came for?" Suddenly, Tricia's eyes grew wide. She jumped up from the table and her chair slid back a few feet as she stood up straight. "You and Mom are getting a divorce!" she exclaimed. Malcolm didn't say anything, and that silence was all Trisha needed to understand. "No, Daddy, you can't divorce Mommy. She loves you and you love her. Please, Daddy, don't do this," Trisha pleaded, tears filling her eyes. Malcolm stood quiet for a moment, listening to her soft crying. Then he walked over to her, wrapped his arms around her, and gently held her head against his chest. "It's okay. You can cry. No matter what happens between me and your mom, I will always love you. And so will she." He had been calling her a nickname since she was little, something she asked for because she struggled to say her name. She called herself T, and Malcolm got used to it. But Jessica, her mother, didn't like the nickname at all. When Trisha turned 14 and started middle school, she asked Malcolm to stop using it because she felt uncomfortable with her friends hearing it. Malcolm was sad but knew that things were changing. He respected her request and stopped calling her that name. After a few minutes, Trisha's crying slowed down and she pulled away from Malcolm. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to break down like that, but you surprised me. I mean, I'm a grown woman. I'm at university and living on my own. Your divorce shouldn't affect me like this," she said, trying to smile. Malcolm smiled weakly at her words. "It's okay. I didn't see this coming either. Life can throw us surprises we don't like, but all we can do is keep moving forward." He hugged her one last time and then let her go. "Are you going to be okay now?" Trisha nodded, wiping her tears away. She grabbed a paper towel and went to the sink, trying to wash away any remaining sadness. Knowing he couldn't comfort her anymore, Malcolm sighed and said cheerfully, "Okay then. I'll help you pack up everything your mom told you to take. Come on, let's go out to eat. Trisha, how does that sound?" "Okay, Dad," she replied. "I'm feeling good now. And you can call me T if you want. I like that name, but only if you bring me some of Mom's ice cream for dessert." Malcolm laughed and said, "All right, it's a deal." Mona was one of the kindest and most caring women around. She got married young at just 16 to a man named Roy Leonard, who was 4 years older than her. At the age she was then, that felt much older. Even though they faced challenges, especially money problems, their marriage worked where others did not. Mona was wise and made it clear to Roy early on that she wouldn't accept any nonsense. Roy needed to be a good husband and father to their kids. This was one reason they stayed together. Roy, despite having some flaws, truly loved Mona and would never want to hurt her. Mona always remembered the hard times they had been through, which made her careful in judging others. So, when Malcolm kicked Jessica out, Mona quickly rushed to support Jessica as soon as she learned about it. By then, Jessica was living in her parents' old house with her son and his 2 roommates. The roommates didn't mind Jackson's mom staying with them. First, she was a great cook. Second, even at her age, she still looked attractive. This made Jackson a little embarrassed, especially when his friends commented on how good-looking his mom was. After 2 weeks had gone by, Trisha came by to pick up her mother's things. Although Trisha was friendly as always, Jessica felt something different about her. It was in the little things, a tiny pause when she spoke, a deep thoughtfulness, and then if caught, a slight look of shame on Trisha's face. These small signs were Jessica's first clues that something was troubling her daughter. Today was the 3rd day in a row that Mona had come to visit, and Jessica was starting to feel a bit worn out by the visits. "So, Jessica, how are you today? I brought some dumplings for you. I remembered how much you loved them back in the day." Mona placed a container on the table and quickly moved to her favorite topic. "Bingo! I swear the prizes at some of these places can be really big. Some go up to $1,000. Not bad for just a couple of hours playing a simple game. I'd love for you to join me one night. I think you'd really enjoy it." "More fun than—" Mona paused, peering around the room, as if she could see what a mess the other rooms were. "Why not stay here all night? I'm sure the boys would love having you around." "But wait," Mona said, her eyes lighting up. "How about this idea? This Thursday, you should come to the game with me. They are having 3 matches in a row. If we win all 3, the big prize is a trip for 2 to the Bahamas. Wouldn't that be amazing?" Jessica didn't know how to reply. She wasn't in the mood for bingo, but she didn't want to hurt Mona's feelings. Just then, Jackson walked in through the door. "Mom, where are you? Oh, there you are!" he shouted as the door closed loudly behind him. "Hello, Mrs. Leonard." "Hello, Jackson. You're starting to look just like your father." Thanks, Mrs. Leonard, Jackson said quickly, hoping to change the subject. Mom, I know this is kind of short notice, but I forgot to mention that we're having a bake sale for the club at the university this Friday. Can you bake a couple of pies on Thursday? Jessica was surprised by Mona's compliment to Jackson. It made her think nervously. What did Mona mean? Did Malcolm know the children weren't his? Had he told Roy and Mona? Was Mona trying to play some mind game when Jackson asked for help? Jessica quickly saw an opening to avoid going to bingo. Sure, Jackson. Oh, wait, Jessica said, then turned to Mona with a smile. I'm sorry, Mona. I really wish I could go with you, but family comes first. Maybe another time? Mona wanted Jessica to come to bingo, but she understood the value of family. Of course. Don't worry, dear. We'll have plenty of chances to get together, Mona said. Thank you so much for understanding, Mona, Jessica replied, feeling genuinely thankful, although that wasn't what Mona had planned. Mona stood up. I must go now. Roy will be home soon. If dinner isn't ready when he gets here, he gets really cranky. Mona smiled at her own joke. You know how men are. They grow bigger as they age, but they still get grumpy if they aren't taken care of. After Mona left, Jessica wondered how much Mona really knew and if she was trying to mess with her mind. It seemed that everything Mona said somehow touched on Jessica's problems. Maybe I'm just being too worried, Jessica thought as she started making dinner for her son and his friends. Maybe I feel a bit guilty and that's making me think strange things. Perhaps that was true, or maybe not. Next chapter. Ian Wilson was not a patient man. He was filled with a strong wish for revenge that consumed his day and even some of his dreams. He had held himself back for too long. So he felt a deep sense of satisfaction when he learned that Malcolm had found out about his wife's affair with him. He was very pleased. Years of hurt and humiliation melted away for Ian as he focused on winning over Jessica and Harris. Convincing Jessica to have children with him was a clever way to get back at Malcolm. He didn't really care about kids. It was just another step in his plan. He felt he had made mistakes with Malcolm, but he wasn't finished with him yet. There was still one more thing to do. Hey, Jessica, how are you? Ian asked with an insincere tone. He wanted to confirm that Jessica was still with him, that she was still on board, and that she believed his fake feelings for her. Hey, babe, I'm good. How about you? Replied the cheerful Jessica. Lonely. I've been waiting for you, Ian said. I haven't heard from you in days. Is everything okay? He asked. Yes, sweetheart. Everything's fine. I miss you too. I wish I could be with you right now. I would call, but things are crazy right now. I think it's best to let Malcolm cool down. I don't want anyone to find out about us until I'm divorced. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea about me. Oh, but you don't realize what you truly are, Jessica, thought Malcolm coldly, not wanting to say it out loud. I understand, baby. You don't need to explain, Ian said calmly. He heard Jessica let out a loud sigh. Oh, you always know just what to say at the right time. I love you so much. I wish I had met you first. Me too, baby, Ian agreed, his voice gentle but filled with longing. But it is what it is. We have to make the best of our situation. We will be together soon, and after that, nothing else will matter, he added with confidence. I know, Ian. I know, but sometimes it's so hard, Jessica said sadly. Oh no, I have to go, she said quickly. Ian, I love you. I'll call you soon. Ian hung up with a smirk. Everything was going well. He had spent years getting to this point, but the end result would be worth it. It was time to set his plan in motion this Saturday. Then Malcolm would understand what it felt like to realize his life had been wasted, that his wife had betrayed him, and that their marriage was a lie. He would discover that the children he raised weren't really his, and that his friends were not really loyal. It would tear him apart. Driven by these happy thoughts, Ian chuckled as he limped slowly to his bedroom, ready to enjoy the sleep of someone who believed they had won. Next chapter. Malcolm sat down and looked carefully at the papers in his hands. He read the report that came with the lab results again. Nothing had changed since he last checked. The results were still the same. He had paid for the DNA test, and now, 2 weeks later, he had the clear results in front of him. Getting DNA samples from his children had been easy. Tricia still used the hairbrush she left in her old room when she visited. Jackson came by sometimes to grab some clean clothes and a meal. He also took a hair sample from one of Jessica's combs. Jessica was definitely the mother of Trisha and Jackson. Now, Malcolm didn't know how to feel. He didn't really believe what Claire had claimed, but it bothered him enough to need answers. He had done the test to prove Claire wrong, not to support her. At first, he was angry, but now, even with some satisfaction, he felt angrier than ever at Jessica. He was upset at her for all the lies over the years and everything else he could blame her for, which was a lot in his eyes. Had he ever loved her? He had, at one time. But as their relationship got worse, his love for her faded too. Now he was almost sure that any love he had left for Jessica was too small to notice. Was he hurt by her lies? Yes. He felt that pain in his heart. His stomach twisted in knots, especially when he thought about the happy times they shared. But whenever he recalled those moments, his mind would abruptly shift to the pain of her years of deception, and he would feel angry all over again. Malcolm wasn't the kind of person to put up with anger, especially not for such a terrible betrayal. He promised himself he would find out who Jessica's lover was and confront him. He planned to do it his way. It wouldn't be polite or civil, and it might even get him in trouble. Maybe even jail. But he thought it was better to be a man in jail than a fool wandering free. He wasn't exactly sure what to do about Jessica, but he knew divorce was coming. He had no doubt about that. He believed the children would eventually learn about their mother's cheating and his own past. He thought he might make her life difficult until she felt the weight of her actions. That wasn't satisfying enough. It felt like very little compared to what she had done to him. But without going to extreme measures, it was the best he could think of for now. He also had some mutual friends who had helped hide Jessica's betrayal. He decided to deal with them later when they least expected it. Next chapter. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" Jackson said, holding the phone to his ear while trying to eat a huge burrito. "I left some papers at home. Can you drive over there and send the papers to me? I'm in a meeting out of town and I need them in about an hour. I'll use the fax number. Can you do that?" Malcolm asked, hoping his son wouldn't say yes and forget. Just after he hung up, Jackson replied, "Sure, Dad, they're on my desk. It's about research on injection molding to make more products. I'll text you the title. When can you come to the house?" "Okay, I'll leave in about 20 minutes, so it will take about 40 minutes to get there." "Is that okay?" Jackson asked, diving into his first burrito. "Yeah, that'll be fine. I'll send you the info right after we hang up." "Okay, Dad. Bye." 5 minutes later, Jackson's phone beeped, showing he had a new message, but he was too busy with his second burrito to notice. Satisfied, he moved to the living room, sat in a comfy chair, and turned on the TV to check for reruns of his favorite shows. A few minutes later, during a computer ad, he remembered his dad's request. Looking at his watch, he saw 45 minutes had passed since the call. Oh no. Jackson knew his father would be mad, but Dad always said, "Better late than never." Hoping his dad would follow that saying, he rushed out the door and jumped in the car, driving fast as many young men do. He arrived at his dad's house in half the time he thought it would take, feeling proud of his speed. Jackson quickly went to the gate and entered the code to unlock it. Once the gate opened, he hurried inside, checking his father's message as he moved. Where did Dad say the papers were? On his desk? I guess I'll have to look. Searching through the papers on the desk, Jackson found what his father wanted but also stumbled upon something else. His eyes widened in surprise. After a moment, Jackson shook his head, trying to focus on faxing the right papers. As he stood there, dialing the fax number and sending each sheet through the machine, his mind drifted back to what he had seen. He felt anger rising within him. Later that evening, when Malcolm arrived home, he found a very upset son waiting for him. Jackson stopped walking and met his dad's gaze. "Why didn't you tell me earlier? Why did I have to find out from some paper? Does Trish know?" "Watch your words, son," Malcolm said firmly, expecting an apology from Jackson. "I'm sorry, Dad," Malcolm said, waving his hand to quiet his son as he sank down onto the couch. He looked up and locked eyes with Jackson. "You weren't supposed to know about this," he added sharply. His stern look made Jackson stop. He was ready to argue over what he deserved to know. "I didn't share this because I wasn't ready to talk about it with you or Trisha. I haven't made any decisions yet, and until I do, this talk is over." Before Malcolm could finish, he stood up and headed for the stairs. "Dad, wait! I'm not finished yet!" Jackson called out loudly, watching his father walk away. Jackson, you can be upset all you want, but I don't have anything else to say. I'm going to bed. You can stay here or go home. Just lock the door behind you. Good night. Frustrated by his father's stubbornness, Jackson stormed out and slammed the door shut, locking it behind him. He knew his dad well. Any further questions would only make things worse. As he walked up the stairs, Malcolm heard the door slam, feeling annoyed. He understood his son's feelings but didn't think that made Jackson's actions okay. He decided not to discuss it further until he figured out what to do next. If his wife wanted to talk with their son and daughter about it, that was her choice. He imagined how she might react, and a brief, cruel smile came to his face before he returned to his serious expression. Next chapter. Jessica hummed happily as she made her lunch. That afternoon, she was with Ian again for what felt like the 100th time. He was handsome, strong, and caring, but one thing that bothered her about their life together was his slow walk, which came from an injury that made him limp. It took him a long time to get around, especially in his big house. Early in their relationship, Jessica had asked him about his limp, but Ian didn't want to talk much about it. It happened a long time ago before I met you. The doctor said it was bad nerve damage and a permanent injury. There's nothing more to say, he explained shortly. Feeling hurt by his quick answer, Jessica replied with sarcasm, I didn't know. Sorry for asking. Since then, she had brought it up now and then. That afternoon, she asked about it again. I'm not going to talk about it. Just stop asking, okay? You've been going on about it for years, but you still don't get it, Ian snapped. Jessica was very angry. She was tired of Ian being harsh with her. He would get distant at times, and it frustrated her. Recently, Malcolm's mixed feelings had been growing stronger and happening more often. If Jessica hadn't learned about Malcolm finding out about her and Ian, she wondered what would have happened. She hoped she would have ended her long affair and focused on her marriage, trying to make up for the years she hadn't fully been with Malcolm. Now, she had no choice. She felt betrayed. Strangely, after Malcolm had thrown her out of their home, she realized that she might consider leaving Ian if she had to. This scared her a lot. Were her feelings for Ian just a result of being bored or maybe trying to get back at Malcolm? The idea was not a pleasant one. In fact, it made her feel sick. What about her children? What did her choices say about their lives? Ian seemed to notice her change in mood, so he slowed down. Sorry, I didn't mean to. It's just a tough subject for me, Ian said with regret. He stopped speaking when he saw Jessica smirk and then giggle. What's funny? He asked a little defensively. Jessica started to laugh hard. Her laughter was bright and joyful. At least that's how her husband would have seen it. But to Ian, it felt rude and harsh. For Malcolm, it made him feel sick and he grew to dislike her more. Sore spot your leg? Sore spot? Jessica said, still laughing. Catching her breath with tears from laughing, Jessica explained to Ian what she meant. The tension from before vanished and she felt lighter. I'm really sorry for laughing. I shouldn't have, but I thought it was funny. I guess it just made me laugh. She smiled. Ian chuckled, though it didn't seem genuine. Yeah, I guess if you see it that way, it could be funny. I'm sorry I wasn't laughing at you. I just want us to have fun together, he replied. Sighing as she remembered, Jessica took her plate and glass to the table and sat down to eat. She chewed slowly, thinking about how she got to this point. Was she going to leave Malcolm one day? Had that always been in her mind? She didn't know. Most of the time, she had been happy with Malcolm. It wasn't that he had done anything wrong to her, but she knew that what she did was wrong when she started seeing Ian. She felt guilty that Ian had almost faced harm from her husband. Ian had often said this was unfair. Because of her parents and their friends, Malcolm was protected from the consequences of his actions, and he would never face punishment for what he did. Jessica had disagreed at first because she knew she had done something that was not forgivable, and that Ian shared some blame too. Even though Malcolm reacted strongly, he was only trying to protect what he cared about, which included her and their family. As time passed, Ian's constant challenges to Jessica's beliefs wore her down. Eventually, she agreed to continue what he had interrupted that day in the woods. Jessica had always said she didn't want kids, but despite her efforts to prevent it, she found out she was going to have Ian's child. Ian quickly pointed out that even with the best plans, their situation meant they were meant to be together. Though it sounded a bit strange, Jessica accepted it to ease her guilt. They had never talked about her leaving Malcolm until one day, not long ago, when Ian suggested making their relationship more official. Since then, Ian had been asking her often about when she would leave Malcolm. At first, Jessica was surprised by his insistence, but as time passed, the idea seemed less real. Recently, Ian insisted she should not spend time with Malcolm anymore, as his jealousy was becoming too strong. Jessica went along with this, following Ian's plan to keep their relationship private until she left Malcolm, divorced him, and announced their marriage. Then Claire came to town, and now their plans felt pointless. Still, something was troubling her. Jessica noticed that Ian hadn't shown himself while Claire was around. When she asked him, he dismissed it without a clear answer. Later, he mentioned he had stayed away because Claire's presence reminded him of bad memories. Jessica thought this was strange since Claire and his friend had saved Ian's life. She expected Ian to greet Claire happily, yet moments like this made Jessica worry. Doubts crept in as she remembered all the unanswered questions she had for Ian. Just then, her phone rang. It was Ian. "Hi, Ian. I was just thinking about you," Jessica said flatly. "Oh, is that a bad thing?" Ian chuckled softly. Ignoring him, she asked, "How was your day?" "Wonderful. How was yours?" Ian replied. "Better days for sure," Jessica said with a yawn she couldn't hide. "You sound upset. Are you okay? Did Malcolm do something?" Ian asked, pretending to be concerned. "No, I'm just tired," Jessica replied. "Good, sweetheart. I won't take much of your time. I called to see if you and the kids could come over to my place tomorrow." It's Saturday, and Ian paused, thinking carefully about what to say next. "I believe it's time for us to stop hiding," he said. He felt grateful to Claire for helping him reach this moment. "She did us a favor. What do you think? Should we go public tomorrow?" He tried to stay calm, knowing Jessica had been pulling away since her sister came to town. He feared she might leave him. There was a quiet moment before she responded. "I don't know, Ian. I feel like we should wait a bit longer, maybe until the divorce is finished." Ian was surprised by her unsure answer. He thought she would be excited about his news. "It could take up to a year for that. What should we do? Ignore each other until then?" "I don't know, Ian. I used to feel sure about things, but now I'm lost." Ian frowned at her lack of confidence but was curious about what she meant. Jessica let out a sad sigh. "It doesn't matter. I've made my choices, and now I have to live with them." She tried to push her regrets aside and asked, "What about this Saturday?" Ian shook off Jessica's uncertain mood. He thought, "I need to take control again. She's becoming harder to handle. But I can finish what I started. Just one more day." "Yes, Saturday is good. I hoped you would come and bring the kids. We could tell them about our wedding plans." "No, we won't say anything about a wedding. I don't want my kids involved in this." Ian felt anger bubbling up inside him. "No, that's not right. They're my kids too." Frustrated with her refusal, Ian said firmly, "Here's the deal. You can bring them over and we'll explain everything together, or I will reach out to them myself. You choose." Jessica could hear the coldness in his voice. She knew he would follow through with his words. Over the years, she had seen many different sides of Ian, but this was a part of him she hadn't encountered fully before. The tension in the air was thick. Ian continued, "I've planned something special for tonight. It's a celebration of us, of our family." "We can do it differently," he pressed. "I want the kids to know who their real father is, so either we tell them about our wedding or I'll have to reveal something else. Either way, it should be interesting." Jessica felt trapped and anxious. She saw no way out and decided to accept what was coming. "Fine. I'll come." "What about the kids?" Ian asked coldly. Jessica sighed and replied, "I'll try to bring them, but they have their own plans." Ian interrupted her sharply. "I don't care how you do it. Just make sure they're here tomorrow. Got it?" "Yes," Jessica said quietly, feeling defeated. "Louder." "I can't hear you," Ian insisted, his voice heavy with emotion. "I said yes," Jessica managed to say a bit louder. Ian cheered. "That's my girl!" His joy was clear. "Soon, my dear Jessica, everything will be over, and we can all move on, just like after a storm." Ian thought with a dark chuckle, He knew Jessica was down, but found pleasure in her discomfort. It didn't matter what would happen next. She and her children were just part of his plan. Ian had carefully laid out everything, and Malcolm would face the consequences of his actions. Instead of replying, Jessica simply ended the call. Ian's anger flared. How could she hang up on him? Maybe she wasn't as strong as he thought. He smirked to himself, believing everyone would pay tomorrow. Jessica felt more trapped than ever, knowing it was her own choices that led her here. She couldn't shake her resentment toward Malcolm. It didn't make sense, but she felt he was partly responsible for her troubles. If he hadn't tried to take Ian down, she wouldn't be feeling so guilty. That guilt had brought her into Ian's life, leading her to this moment. One thing she was sure of, she would not involve her children in this. No matter what she told Ian, she wasn't going to ask them to come tomorrow. This situation was between her and Ian and no one else. Well, maybe one other person, but she wasn't about to tell Malcolm about her past. Feeling brave, she decided to write down her thoughts. Meanwhile, Malcolm woke up suddenly. He blinked his eyes to adjust his vision and got out of bed. He checked the clock and saw it was 6:45 Saturday morning. He had planned to sleep in, but something had interrupted him, and he couldn't figure out what it was. Maybe it was a strange noise. Maybe someone was in the house, or perhaps some of the kids were around. But he hadn't heard anything unusual since waking up. Shaking his head, he thought about going back to sleep, but now he was awake and ready to start his day. After doing his morning routines, Malcolm went to the kitchen, thinking about what to make for breakfast. First he wanted coffee, then he needed to decide what to eat. Cereal? No, he didn't want something cold because it made his stomach churn. How about an omelet? That sounded good, and he also wanted toast piled high with butter. His stomach growled in agreement. So, whistling happily, he started cooking. While he was washing some dishes, the house phone rang. He didn't answer because it was still early on a Saturday, and he wasn't ready to talk to anyone. He wanted to enjoy his quiet morning. A few moments later, his cell phone started ringing too. Frustrated by 2 calls in a row, Malcolm muttered to himself, "Can I get some peace and quiet?" He let the cell phone ring, hoping it would stop soon. It finally did, but just as he relaxed, it rang again. Annoyed, he tossed the pan aside and dried his hands quickly. He looked at his phone to see who was calling. It was an unknown long-distance number. He thought about ignoring it, but then he changed his mind. With a quick movement, he answered the call. "What? Malcolm, is that you?" A woman's voice said. It sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it right away. "Yeah? Who is this?" he asked. "Malcolm, it's Claire. Please don't hang up. Something's wrong with Jessica." Claire? What in the world? Malcolm thought to himself as he took in her words. "How did you get my number?" "Never mind that. Jessica is in some kind of trouble. She texted me," Claire explained quickly. "What makes you think I care about her? She's not my concern anymore," Malcolm said firmly, interrupting her. "Please, Malcolm, this isn't just about Jessica, it's about your kids," Claire pleaded. His irritation grew. "What about Trisha and Jackson?" he yelled, his voice getting louder. "I'm not sure. Jessica sent me a letter, but it's confusing. She mentioned them a lot, and she talked about Ian, too. She's meeting Ian at his house this morning to sort things out." Malcolm felt uneasy. "What does that mean?" "Ian wants the kids to come to the meeting. It all sounds serious. I can forward you the letter so you can read it," Claire suggested quickly. "I'm really worried, Malcolm. I wouldn't bother you if it wasn't important." Ignoring her worries, Malcolm asked sharply, "What time is the meeting and where?" "At 8 o'clock. I'll send you his address right now," Claire replied. "I'll send the letter too." "Okay, I'm going," Malcolm said, grabbing his coat and car keys. "Thank you, Malcolm. Please hurry. It's almost 8 o'clock, Claire said urgently. "I'll find a flight after we hang up," he said, hearing the worry in her voice. Malcolm paused for a moment, then another thought came to him. Why are you really doing this? From what I've heard, you dislike your sister. At first, there was a long silence. Then she spoke slowly, saying, "I used to hate her a lot. I felt intense anger towards Jess. But that's over now. I let go of that long ago." She chuckled softly and added, "Don't you know that hate hurts the heart? Whatever she's done, she's still my sister. We're not very close, but she's still family," she continued. Malcolm grumbled, agreeing with her words. He ended the call, and soon after, an address popped up on his phone. He focused on driving safely and sped through the city streets, thankful for the light morning traffic. Later, Jessica arrived at Ian's nice apartment just after 8 in the morning. She was by herself. Whatever Ian was thinking, he didn't need any kids around to make things complicated. She stood before Ian's door, which was simple yet elegant, just like Ian used to be. Jessica thought about it for a moment, hesitating. She raised her hand to the buzzer but didn't press it right away, as if something was stopping her. "Are you sure you want to do this? Are you ready for a tough conversation?" she asked herself. She knew there was more to consider, making her doubt her decision, but she pushed those thoughts aside. Shaking her head, she mistook her nerves for just being uneasy, and finally pressed the call button. To her surprise, the door opened quickly. Usually Ian took longer to answer depending on what he was doing, but she was even more shocked to see who was standing there. Her son, Jackson, stood at the door with a slightly confused look, waiting for her to come in. "Come on, Mom, get inside," Jackson said, a bit annoyed. "What? How?" Jessica started, but her mind was racing too fast to finish her question. Jackson gently took her hand and led her inside, breaking the spell of confusion that had grabbed her. "Jackson, what are you doing here?" she asked. He shrugged and replied, "Mr. Wilson called last night and wanted to meet. He said you had something to tell us. Ian?" He darted around her, knowing she wouldn't want the kids to come in. "Us? Who else is here?" Jessica asked, her heart racing with worry. She was scared of the answer. Jackson raised his hands and pointed back into the apartment. "Just me. Trish had something else to do, and Mr. Wilson is here, of course." Jessica nodded her head and quietly peeked around the wall to make sure everything was fine. She turned to her son and insisted in a soft voice, "Go away, Jackson." Seeing the stubborn look on his face made Jessica feel even more worried. "Please don't argue, just leave now." Confused by his mother's strange behavior, Jackson looked at her. "What's going on, Mom? Why are you whispering?" Before she could reply, a loud voice came from the other room. "Oh, there you are, Jess! I'm glad you're here. I wish Trish could come too, but that's how things go," Ian Wilson said with a grin as he limped back to the main room. "Come on in, everyone. Have a seat. There are snacks on the cart. Help yourselves. No formalities in my house today." Jackson walked away from his mom and went to the cart to see what snacks he could find. "Jackson," Jessica called out. "Go home." Ian jumped in quickly. "What's wrong, Jess? Don't you want him to know the truth?" Jackson stopped and turned to his mom, confused by the way she said his name. He looked puzzled at Ian and then back at her. "What are you talking about, Mom? Going home? What's the truth?" Before Jessica could explain, Ian said with a strange cheerfulness, "My dear boy, your mom wants you to leave because she doesn't want you to know who your real father is." Jackson frowned and looked from Ian to his mother. "What's he talking about, Mom?" "Go home, Jackson. We'll talk later." Seeing Jackson hesitate, Jessica added, "I promise I'll explain everything, but not right now. Just go home and I'll join you in a little while." "No!" Wilson shouted. He took a deep breath and continued, "He's staying here. Jackson is old enough to understand things. Your mother needs to hear what I have to say." With an unsettling calmness, Ian added, "He will find out the harsh truth about his mom." Caught off guard by Ian's sudden outburst, Jessica was shocked and didn't know how to respond. Jackson, however, quickly understood what was happening. "Hey, don't talk to my mom like that," he said firmly. His expression was serious, and his brown eyes looked determined. "How am I supposed to talk to your mother, Jackson? Why should I? What I need to tell you is about her past, and she is not part of that anymore. Your mom was just a way to get what I wanted. How should I even describe her?" This confrontation put Jessica in a tight spot, and she realized things were only getting worse. Jessica was shocked when she heard Ian's harsh words. A bad person? She wasn't a bad person. Why had he said that? Ian loved her. He had told her many times that he loved her, and she loved Ian, didn't she? Did she? Lost in her thoughts, Jessica didn't see her son moving toward Ian or hear Jackson's low growl as he started to back away. "Stop, boy!" Ian shouted, stepping back and hiding his right hand behind him to grab his gun. "Stop! What are you doing? He's our son!" Jessica yelled, finally noticing the angry words and the gun in his hand. "Jackson, he's not my son! I don't have a son! He has my DNA, but that's it! So don't play these games with me!" Jackson halted when he saw the gun aimed at him. But instead of feeling scared, his anger grew, especially after hearing Ian call his mom a bad name. But, but you said, Jessica stammered, trying to understand what was happening. Jackson faced his mom, keeping Ian in his sight. He used his body to shield her while reaching for something on his belt. He hoped Ian wouldn't notice what he was doing. Forget what I said, you foolish woman. I just used you. Yes, that's right. Used you to get back at your stupid husband. Ian laughed crazily. I played you like a game from the very start. How could I love someone who broke promises and abandoned everyone? You were so easy. I thought I'd have to try hard, but no, you gave up after just a few weeks. What? You've been playing with my feelings all these years? Jessica asked, surprised by the shocking news. Yes, I have, Ian said with a laugh. If your husband had just accepted things and let me charm you long ago, it would have ended back then. But he had to be the angry hero. Ian seemed to lose control, shouting harsh words at Jessica. You terrible woman! You never loved me? Jessica asked, her voice shaking. Wow, you really are clueless. Didn't you hear? Of course I never loved you. You were just a tool. How could I love a tool? The truth is, I hate you. His harsh words hung heavy in the air. Jessica was horrified by what he said. She was also horrified by her own choices with Ian. Over the years, she had done what he wanted because she believed he loved her. But none of that compared to the deep sadness she felt for how she had betrayed her husband. All for nothing. Just a twisted effort for revenge from the past. In her sorrow, she cried for all that could have been but now would never happen. Now you know how I felt all those painful years ago, Ian said sadly. I had planned to tell you how I used you, Jessica. How you took away Malcolm's chance to be a father is something you will all remember forever. You are truly awful. Ian laughed softly but in a disturbing way as he waved the gun around, not caring about anyone else. I want everyone to see how little your promises mean. That you, a married woman, are willing to be with another man and have children with him, inspired by his nasty words. Ian continued to speak in a harsh tone. More importantly, I want to see that man's face when he finds out everything. I want to see how broken he feels and how angry he gets. Ian's laughter echoed in the quiet apartment. Jessica noticed that most of the furniture was gone. She looked into the bedroom and saw it was almost empty. Do you see there's nothing here? How smart of you to notice, Ian said with mockery. I gave the furniture to charity. They needed it more than you. My job is done and I'm leaving. You horrible man! Jessica finally found her voice. Her fear of Ian and his gun was fading as her anger grew. By the way, I messed with everything in the room since I couldn't tell if you were here or not. Ian was shocked by Jessica's words. For a moment he froze, but then he regained his composure. Why, you awful person, he shouted. But before he could say more, Jackson suddenly rushed forward with a frightening scream. The young man reached Ian just as Ian raised his gun and fired. The loud bang echoed in the almost empty apartment. Ian and the young man fell together, with Jackson pushing into Ian just after the shot. The sound still filled the air when Jessica let out a terrified scream, frozen in shock at what was happening. In her fear, she had forgotten about her son. Jackson heard everything that she and Ian said in the back of her mind. Jessica felt a little annoyed, but worry for her son took over. Jackson? She screamed, rushing to him. Jackson was lying on the floor, facing away from her. She wanted to turn him over but hesitated, unsure if it would be safe. Her mind was racing, and she couldn't remember what to do. Hoping she was making the right choice, she carefully rolled him onto his back. She tried to remember what slow bleeding meant. Taking one of his arms, she felt for a pulse. Yes, it was there, weak but steady. With some relief, Jessica reached for her phone to call for help, but a cold voice stopped her. Don't even think about it, Ian said hoarsely. Jessica turned to Ian and noticed he was holding a gun aimed right at her. He was still on the floor but lifted his hand to point the gun. This is bad, he might shoot. I need to call 911. Jackson is really hurt, she yelled in frustration. No, you're not calling anyone, Ian groaned as he sat up and kept the gun aimed at her. What? Are you crazy? I'm calling 911, Jessica said firmly. The police will catch you for what you've done, you monster, Jessica said, her voice cold. Gradually, Ian got to his feet and said with a smirk, I don't think so. Just so you know, I didn't plan on killing anyone. I wanted you and your family to remember what you did to your husband. Your kids will know you hurt their dad, and they will see you differently. And Malcolm will know too, but he will see that his life was wasted. Do you think you can start over? Have kids with someone new? What woman would want to marry him now? Especially someone who could have children with an older man. Ian's chilling laughter filled the quiet apartment. How could you be so cruel? I thought you cared, Jessica said, shocked. Forget you, Ian yelled, his words hitting Jessica like a drumbeat. I didn't make you do anything. You chose this. You tricked me. You lied and misled me with your fantasies. I believed you, Jessica said calmly. She felt numb now. All she could think about was buying time. Someone had to hear the gunshot and call for help. She just needed to wait for help to come for Jackson. It's all part of my plan, Ian explained, sounding more relaxed. I wasn't going to hurt any of you until a few minutes ago. But when the chance came, my plans changed, Ian said with a smirk, pleased with himself. What do you mean? Jessica asked, curious despite her fear. I don't understand. If you didn't want to hurt us, why change your mind? Oh, that part. Simple. When your hero shows up, I had to act. Ian kicked Jackson with his foot, saying, You and your son broke into my place. We fought, and I grabbed the gun because I was scared. Clever, right? Jessica's eyes widened in shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Such things happened in real life, she knew this, but hearing it spoken of casually was terrifying. It's hard to believe what, Jessica started to say, but something was stuck in her throat, making it hard for her to speak. Jessica tried again. Why? With a sly smile, Ian explained patiently, That's the clever part. By taking you and the hero out of the picture, Malcolm will be lost at sea. There won't be any blame, no excuses, and no answers. He won't understand why you did it. He will be trapped in his own thoughts and doubts, never able to find out from you. Plus, he can't escape from the anger and pain you have caused him, Ian continued. And I think we both know why. He enjoys his new role. Jackson, I bet Malcolm has really come to care for the boy, even though he isn't his father. So if you destroy him, Malcolm will feel even weaker. There won't even be a fake son to carry on his name. Just seeing his daughter will always remind Malcolm of what he's lost. So I'll let her live. Yes, Malcolm will suffer, and there's nothing he can do about it. Jessica stood there, her hands clenched, staring at Ian in shock as he spoke, his words feeling foreign to her. Shaking her head, she said, You can't do that. They will find out. Maybe, he replied, but I bet the police won't figure anything out. As he laughed, Ian stepped back and took aim at Jackson, who lay still. Now it's time to go. No more talking. Wait, Jessica shouted, jumping up and rushing at Ian. At the same time, Ian raised his gun. Ian quickly turned to point his gun at Jessica, who was charging at him. Her face showed surprise, just like someone does when they've lost. Jessica fell to the floor. A loud noise echoed in the apartment, and it shook before Ian could turn around. He heard a bang that was louder than his gun and felt a force hit him in the chest. Looking around, he found himself on the floor, staring up. His vision was blurred, and although he could hear voices, he couldn't understand what they were saying. Then, a loud buzzing filled his head, and he tried to cover his ears, but his hands felt heavy. All he wanted was to sleep, to rest. As a gurgling sound filled the air, Ian drifted into darkness, where he hoped peaceful sleep awaited him. In the next part, Malcolm arrived at the condo just in time, even if he had gone a little over the speed limit. Knowing it was Saturday morning, he figured that most people would still be at home, so he had to look for a place to park. He spent 5 minutes driving around until he found an open spot. When he pulled up to the entrance, he saw that the glass doors were locked and could only be opened with a key card. To get in, you had to be a resident or a guest. There was a horseshoe-shaped security desk right in the middle of the main lobby, with a watchful guard sitting behind it. Malcolm knew 2 people who lived in the building, but he wasn't sure they would let him in without asking the guard. He spoke quickly into the speaker next to the door, explaining that he needed to get inside. The guard listened to Malcolm, but did not let him in. As Malcolm stood outside, thinking about how he could get in, the guard looked at him with suspicion. Just then, a tenant stepped out of one of the elevators. It was one of the 2 people Malcolm knew. As soon as the tenant came out, Malcolm started talking to him. Hey, William, long time no see? Wow, if it isn't Malcolm Harris, how have you been? After a brief chat, Malcolm quickly told William what was happening, making it clear that he felt it was serious. William thought for a moment, rubbing his chin. He could see the worry in Malcolm's eyes and decided to help. William turned to the door and checked his card before opening it. He invited Malcolm in, saying, "Hank, this is Malcolm Harris, a good friend of mine. He thinks there might be trouble at the Wilson place." "He's not on Mr. Wilson's guest list," Hank started to say. "Hank, I'm not asking," William replied firmly. After a pause, he added, "I take full responsibility for Mr. Harris." The guard's serious face shifted to a smile as he nodded to William. If William wasn't the chairman of the building's tenants committee, Hank would have told him the same thing he told Malcolm. "Yes, sir," Hank said with a quick nod. "Great. Thank you, Hank." "I knew I could count on you," William said. Then he turned to Malcolm and whispered, "Whatever you do, please don't cause any trouble, okay?" "I understand, no problem at all," Malcolm replied, relieved. "You have no idea how grateful I am, William." "Thank you," Malcolm said. "Great. I've got to go. I'll see you both later. I hope you and your wife are doing well," William said with a smile before moving off to take care of his other tasks. Malcolm and Hank stared at each other for a moment, both a bit uneasy. Then Malcolm said, "Let's go." But before the guard could reply, they both heard the loud sound of a gunshot. It was faint, but unmistakable. They exchanged surprised looks and hurried towards the noise. Wilson's apartment was on the first floor and was the cheapest in the building. Because of that, Malcolm and the guard were able to hear the loud shout that came just before the gunshot. As they arrived at Wilson's door, they jumped when they heard the gunfire. The guard, who had stopped in front of the door, hesitated, holding the master keycard. He seemed unsure of what to do. Malcolm quickly stepped beside the guard and took the master keycard from his hand, sliding it into the lock. The door clicked open just before Malcolm pushed it open hard. The door was locked, and Malcolm stumbled back a bit before kicking it with the technique he had learned in the army. The door flew open and smashed against the wall. Without hesitation, Malcolm rushed inside. Reaching under his shirt, he pulled out his gun ready for anything. As he entered, he saw Wilson pointing a gun at him. In a split second, Malcolm pulled his trigger. Wilson's shocked expression as he fell to the ground told Malcolm he had hit his target. Malcolm dashed to Wilson and kicked the gun away from him. Then, he checked on his son, Jackson, who was breathing lightly. Hearing a loud voice behind him, he turned to see the guard aiming a gun at him. "Call 911!" Malcolm shouted, hoping to distract the guard for a moment. "I'm going to help!" Malcolm said as he started to give Jackson first aid. The guard, unsure of what else to do in the chaos, put his gun away. He pulled out his phone to call for help. Malcolm could hear the guard calling out loudly, but he focused on Jackson. Then he realized his wife was in the room. He felt a rush of worry. Checking to see if she was alive was hard, and he never thought their story would end like this. What Jessica had done felt like a mirror to his own actions, and there was no way to go back. Would there ever be forgiveness? Yet no matter what, Malcolm knew he could never hurt Jessica. Instead, he felt sadness for their children. Malcolm felt a deep sadness for both himself and Jessica. Suddenly, his eyes became warm and a little blurry with tears. He shook his head to push aside thoughts of his wife and focused back on Jackson. The whole time, Malcolm kept steady pressure on the wound on his son's shoulder, careful not to turn his head so he wouldn't see Jessica's body. He looked back at Jackson. Even though his face was pale, Jackson was still breathing. Malcolm glanced at Hank and asked with a shaky voice, "How soon will the ambulance get here?" Hank, still on the phone, asked the 911 operator and learned that it would take 5 minutes for the ambulance to arrive. That felt like too long. Frustrated, Malcolm took a moment to think before calmly suggesting, "Maybe you should go back to the lobby to let the paramedics in, don't you think? Time is important for my son." He was annoyed by his own worries and reminded of the job he didn't like. As Hank left the apartment, he sarcastically said into the phone, "Don't shoot anyone else." But Malcolm was lost in his own thoughts and didn't hear him. It felt like a long time, but it was less than 5 minutes until the first responders arrived. Malcolm kept a close watch on Jackson. 2 EMTs took charge. Malcolm could only stand by and watch as one checked his son's vital signs and set up an IV for him. They also looked at Wilson and saw that he was in bad shape. The EMTs divided their attention between the two patients until another crew showed up. As the second team prepared Wilson for help, the first team took Jackson outside. Then, the police arrived. Just as Malcolm stepped out of the building behind the stretcher carrying Jackson, he noticed a guard pointing at a thin man in a wrinkled blue suit. There was a uniformed officer with him, and soon more squad cars arrived with flashing lights and loud sirens. Just as Malcolm got into the ambulance with Jackson, a man in the rumpled suit came up to him and said, "Mr. Harris, please wait. I'm Detective Hunt, and I have a few questions for you." Malcolm looked at the detective coolly. "I'm sorry, Detective, but my son has been shot and I need to go with him. He's unconscious, and I'm sure the medical staff will have questions too, especially about his health history." After looking at Malcolm thoughtfully for a moment, the detective nodded. "Okay, Mr. Harris. I'll come by the hospital to take your statement. Please don't leave without answering any questions." Malcolm turned and walked into the waiting ambulance. It was a while before the detective arrived with two officers. By that time, Jackson had finished his surgery and was resting. Thankfully, the bullet had not hurt any important parts of his body. However, Jackson faced a long and hard recovery, possibly needing therapy to help him get better. His son was lucky, but Jackson had a tough road ahead. The important thing was that his son would be okay. Jackson lay asleep in a private hospital room, while his father sat in a very uncomfortable chair beside him. The doctor in charge of Jackson's care said he would stay asleep for a couple of days to help with the strong pain he was feeling before waking him up. Malcolm finally called Tricia, who was away with friends. He told her about Jackson but left out the news about her mother. He wanted to tell her face-to-face when she got there. It wasn't the kindest choice, but Malcolm hadn't fully processed what he had seen, and he probably never would. He wasn't sure he wanted to. It was a hard way to remember the woman he once loved. Tricia would arrive in a few hours, and Malcolm knew he needed to clear his mind for himself, for Tricia, and for Jackson. He wasn't sure if Jackson knew about his mother. With his head in his hands, Malcolm tried to push his thoughts away. Ignoring the hard feelings was simpler. Then he remembered he hadn't called Eric. He could have done that before Tricia came. Just as Malcolm reached for his phone, two officers walked into the room. He had no time to react before they were beside him, and their expressions were not friendly. "Mr. Harris, stand up," said the man who had earlier introduced himself as Detective Hunt. Before Malcolm could protest, two patrolmen grabbed his arms and lifted him out of his chair. They pulled his arms behind his back and pushed him down to the floor. "What is going on?" Malcolm shouted as one of the officers put a knee on his neck. "Don't resist and it will be easier," shouted one of the policemen standing above him. Malcolm felt something heavy pressing on his back, maybe a shoe. "Martin, hurry up, handcuff him, he's trying to get away," one cop called out. Malcolm didn't try to escape, but he could hear the sound of a gun being readied. "Stop resisting. If you keep this up, you could get hurt," said the other officer. Despite the growing pain in his shoulders and arms, Malcolm avoided answering questions. He didn't want to get caught up in the tricky game that Detective Fernandez was playing. He kept asking for a lawyer and medical help. Suddenly, a loud, strange voice echoed in the room, telling Fernandez to leave right away. Fernandez's eyes widened in surprise, and in a rush he jumped up from his chair and hurried out without saying a word to Malcolm. Malcolm was stuck, unable to move, and the pain shot through him. Each wave of pain sent him into his own mind, fighting against the dark feelings that threatened to pull him under. He knew he could only stay above for so long before the pain would take over completely. Maybe it's not so bad, Malcolm thought. What is happening here? He had noticed that Fernandez had asked for a lawyer and medical help several times since he arrived. Did anyone even call for help? An angry man stood in front of two detectives, Emil Hunt and Manuel Fernandez. "Come on, Captain. This guy is in trouble and he was about to break. He was ready to confess," Hunt complained. But then he saw the captain's serious face and stopped talking. Captain Amos Albright looked at them sharply and spoke. "The man was faking it. If he was really hurt that badly, he'd be out cold from the pain by now." "The guy is just playing games with us," Fernandez added. He thought the man was close to giving away everything. "Just a couple more minutes, and I'll be done with you two," he thought. Albright continued. I only came here because the chief called me at home. He was not happy that you two were holding a man without a lawyer or any medical help, even though he asked for it many times. The two detectives were surprised and worried that their boss had been contacted. How did he know? Does he have a spy here? Hunt asked, annoyed. Albright explained to them as if they didn't understand. Neither of you showed up at the Friday meeting, which is why you don't know what's going on. Since you two don't have any friends here because of your reckless behavior, no one thought to fill you in. I bet you thought it was clever to bring Harris into this room where the cameras and communication have been down for weeks. You thought you could keep him quiet until you had more time to crack him open and get that confession. No one would know about it, especially since there would be no proof that Harris was even in that room. Am I right? The captain asked in a surprisingly friendly tone. His eyes, however, stayed stern and serious. Hunt and Fernandez just stared at the captain, confused about how he knew, as if he could read their thoughts. Last week, the technicians came in and fixed everything. They installed new cameras, set up new communication tools, and most importantly, any questioning that happens in one of the rooms is now recorded and sent to headquarters, where many people watch the cameras. The cameras turn on by themselves when the door opens and turn off when the door is closed. The detectives now looked at their captain in shock as his words sank in, and they realized what it meant. However, Emil Hunt, the lead detective, quickly gathered his thoughts. Oh, Captain, we did not treat the suspect unfairly. What did the chief actually see? Just two police officers trying to do their job. While we waited for his lawyer, we wanted to see if he had anything to tell us. Like Manuel said, there is no sign that he was harmed. Besides, if he was hurt, it happened before we took him into custody. I've heard enough. This is being handled by internal affairs. It's out of my hands, Captain Albright said firmly. And before you say anything else, don't. I don't want to hear it because whatever you say, I will have to report. Darn it, Fernandez exclaimed. Internal affairs? Isn't that right, Captain? Why did you have to do this? Manuel began, but the captain cut him off. I had nothing to do with your investigation. The chief did. And anyway, before I forget, taking a deep breath, Captain Albright said, Detective First Class Emil Hunt and Detective Third Class Manuel Fernandez, you are both officially suspended until Internal Affairs finishes their review and you appear before the police board. You are both ordered to turn in all items belonging to the police department, including your weapons and body gear. You must also leave this building until further notice. Shocked by what their captain had just said, they could only stare in disbelief at Albright. I'm sorry, but this is what happens when you forget to follow the rules. And the chief saw it, along with about 30 other people. Sighing, Albright spoke more softly, his expression calmer. Go home, call your representative, get a lawyer. Do whatever you think is best. But for now, clear out your desks and lockers and leave my precinct. They looked away from Albright, like people facing a difficult reality, and started walking towards their team to gather their things and hand in what they needed. Albright watched them for a bit before sighing and turning back to where the criminal was. Now, he had to handle Mr. Harris. No doubt Harris would cause problems for him. Albright decided he should call his wife to let her know he would be home late. Looks like it's going to be another long night. The police had not officially charged Malcolm yet. Captain Albright and two uniformed officers entered and removed Malcolm's cuffs. They apologized for how he had been treated before. An ambulance arrived soon after to take him to the hospital. Malcolm's lawyer was called, and when Malcolm shared what had happened to Hunt and Fernandez, his lawyer got very excited. After promising he wouldn't discuss anything about Wilson or the police, Malcolm hung up, planning to meet his lawyer at the hospital soon. Malcolm had hurt his neck, but when his lawyer heard about it, he was almost jumping for joy, thinking about how much the injury would help their case. He explained that he was happy because he was going to file a lawsuit against the police, the city, and anyone else he could include. Malcolm felt glad for his lawyer, but also remembered his own pain. He told his lawyer, Richard Rand Teeny Santini, that his neck hurt a lot, and there were many things he needed to deal with because of Jessica's death. Yeah, I don't know if I can manage everything right now, Malcolm said. I can send someone else if you need anything signed, Rick offered. I'm really sorry about Jessica. I can't imagine what you and the kids are going through. I still can't believe it, Malcolm replied, feeling mixed emotions. I'll see you in a few days. If anything changes, let me know, Rick said. And remember, if the police come to your place, call me first. Don't talk to them before you call me. Got it? Yeah, I got it, Malcolm said, feeling annoyed by the repeated warnings. They shook hands, wishing each other well. After Rick left, Malcolm leaned back in his chair, feeling some relief. He had been at the hospital all night and most of today. T would be home soon. Malcolm groaned, trying to find a way to sit that didn't hurt as much because of the pain and the uncomfortable neck brace he had to wear. The doctor insisted he keep it on for a few days, maybe longer. The doctor wanted him to stay in the hospital a bit more, but Malcolm felt he had too much to do and no one to help him. The doctor sadly let him go home with a list of serious warnings. The most important one was to wear a neck brace all the time. As soon as Malcolm was free from the police, he called Eric. After he explained what happened, Eric quickly agreed to take care of the company until Malcolm could return. Eric also said he would help in any other way if needed. Malcolm was grateful for the offer, but he assured Eric that everything was settled. Now he had to face his daughter and explain why her mother had died. He knew Trisha would demand to know why. There was no way to avoid her questions. Why had her mother gone to Wilson's house that morning? Why had Wilson harmed her? And why had he shot her brother? Malcolm felt confident he could answer some of these, but he couldn't fully understand why Wilson had planned such a cruel lie that ended in tragedy. At least Claire hadn't shown up yet, and for that, he was thankful. Malcolm wished Claire had never entered their lives. All the bad things happened when she returned, but that wasn't really fair. Jessica had been involved with Wilson for years. Maybe that was who Claire meant when she said Jessica was with him. Ian Wilson. Malcolm hated that man more than he could say. If anyone deserved to be gone, it was him. Malcolm thought about how much easier things would be if that man had never come back. His mood darkened further, thinking about Wilson. New anger filled him as despair washed over him all at once. His heart felt heavy. It was hard to breathe. If he could have rested his head in his hands, he would have, but the brace around his neck kept him from doing that. Instead, he leaned back in his chair. Tears of sorrow spilled from his tightly closed eyes, but he held back the loud cries. Only the tears slowly rolling down his worn face showed the sadness inside him. Why, Jessica? Why couldn't you be happy with me? What was I missing that you needed from someone else? Why did you choose that man, Wilson? What started as a small thought grew until he shouted the last question in frustration. He almost expected an answer, but only silence filled the room. Then came the next chapter, the talk with Trisha. It was even harder than Malcolm had thought. First, she was in shock, unable to react to what he was telling her. Then her anger came, and she shouted at Malcolm, blaming him, her mother, and Ian. Soon after, she felt deep sadness, realizing she could not deny the truth. Trisha slipped into a dark place of sadness. Jessica's mother had passed away, and nothing could change that fact. Jessica wasn't coming back. She cried in Malcolm's arms for what felt like hours, though it was really only a few minutes. Soon after, Claire rushed into the house, bringing some chaos with her. Yet somehow there was a sense of order when Claire arrived, even if Malcolm didn't really like her. Claire quickly took charge. She started cooking, washing clothes, cleaning, and doing whatever else Trisha needed. Malcolm was surprised, but still annoyed by Claire's presence. Who would have thought she could be so helpful? He would never have guessed. Malcolm grumbled quietly to himself. He was also bothered that he hadn't seen Claire show any emotions about her sister's death. Everyone reacts to loss in different ways, but he couldn't understand how Claire seemed so calm. She didn't shed a tear as she comforted Trisha. Eventually, Trisha settled down and went to sleep in her room. Malcolm had too much on his mind. His neck was hurting badly and he couldn't sleep. So he sat in his chair trying to make sense of his life while staring blankly at the wall. Trisha will be okay, Malcolm. She's strong, just like her mom and dad, Claire said wearily, entering the room and breaking his quiet thoughts. Malcolm grumbled back but kept staring ahead, doing his best to ignore her. Claire moved slowly around his chair so she wouldn't startle him. She stepped into his view, cleared her throat, and looked him in the eye. "I'm sorry, Malcolm," she said softly, her voice tired and a bit uneasy. Malcolm looked at her for a moment, surprised, but then turned his gaze back to the wall. His face was hard, and his eyes sparkled faintly in the dim room. Claire didn't fully understand how her words affected him, but she felt the need to continue. Trisha told me Jackson will get better. I'm so relieved. I couldn't have imagined this. Well, I'm just happy. I'll visit him in the morning if that's okay with you. I'm not trying to intrude, Malcolm, but he's my nephew, and Trisha is my niece. I want to help as much as I can. Where have you been all these years? And now you want to take care of my family? What about your sister? Malcolm asked quietly. Don't you care about her? As if she could sense his thoughts, Claire replied a bit uncertainly. I want to go to Jessica's funeral too. We had things left unsaid before I left. I wish this was all over. If you really don't want me there, I'll keep my distance. I'll stay away from everyone. She was my sister, even if I didn't always treat her like one. No, it seemed nothing could change Malcolm. Claire could see that whatever her words were doing, it was hidden inside the quiet man. I guess I'll head out now. I still need to find a hotel room, and it's getting late, Claire said as she left the room. Good night, Malcolm. Just as she stepped outside, she heard her brother-in-law call after her. Wait, Claire. Surprised by his sudden and firm words, she stopped and turned back, curious about what else he might say. It's late. We have some extra bedrooms you can use. You can stay tonight or not. It's up to you. But if Trisha needs you, it might be best to be close by. Malcolm spoke in a distant tone, almost without feeling, and he didn't move at all. He kept looking straight ahead. If Claire had been facing him, she might have noticed a tear slip down his cheek. After a moment of thought, Claire nodded, mostly to herself, as if she agreed with him. But her mind was on something else. All right, Malcolm, thank you. I think I will stay. I'll see you in the morning. Good night, Malcolm responded. Hearing his quiet words made Claire smile sadly. The next part of the story begins. Ashes and hope, waiting for that hopeful day when the Lord comes down from heaven. On the day of Jessica's funeral, a thunderstorm raged. The funeral home had set up a large tent for guests. But as more people arrived, the tent quickly filled up. Malcolm, Trisha, Claire, and a few other family members squeezed under the canopy, taking their seats. The church service felt long, stretching over an hour. It seemed like everyone wanted to share their thoughts, and they lined up to speak at the podium. Finally, the funeral director stood up and bluntly said their time was up. Another service was scheduled at the church. They needed to leave and head to the burial site. As rain blew under the awning and a strong wind whipped around, the priest hurriedly read his tribute. As soon as he finished, he quickly left. No one else was willing to go out in the storm to say any final words. Soon, those gathered moved quickly to their cars, eager to head home. Only Malcolm, Trisha in her wheelchair, Claire, Eric, and a couple of friends, Mona and Roy, stayed behind. Mona was nice, but Roy was a bother, Malcolm thought, as he thanked them for their support and kind words. Roy just wouldn't stop talking. He went on and on about people he knew who had passed away and the funerals they had. That was until Mona pulled on his sleeve and told Malcolm it was time to go. I'm sorry, Malcolm. Roy talks like a long train and it takes forever for him to finish, she said, half explaining herself and half apologizing. Despite Roy's complaints, Mona carried on. Like the lost tribe of Israel, he just wanders around, she added, brushing off Roy's blunder. Malcolm thanked them for coming to Jessica's funeral, saying, We really appreciate your support. If you need help, just ask. Mona didn't say much more because she was sure that Malcolm would never ask for help. He was too proud for that. Thanks for the offer, Malcolm. I'll reach out if I need to, she replied. Malcolm answered quickly, almost like a machine. We'll be fine. Okay, Malcolm, but I'll check on you now and then, Mona promised. Then she lowered her voice so only Malcolm could hear. She's in a lot of pain, Mal. She's really suffering. She thought she was talking about Trisha. Malcolm quietly replied, Trish will be fine, even if she's had a tough time. She'll get better. Mona's eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly agreed. Oh, I'm sure you're right. Trisha is a strong girl. Taking a breath, she hesitated, feeling uneasy. I meant Claire. Malcolm looked at Mona for a second before looking away, as if he was afraid. In a calm but cold voice, he said, I don't know, Mel. Please listen. She has no one. Her parents passed away a long time ago, and her sister died not too long ago. The rest of her family wants nothing to do with her. You and your kids are all she has left. Mona said urgently, almost begging, yet still avoiding his gaze, fearing he might see her as harsh. Malcolm replied in a low, stern whisper. Mona, I don't care. She's not family to me. He almost said Claire could join her sister, but then he realized how cruel that would be. Did he really think that way about Claire? Did he really want her gone? His mind was racing, feeling like he was trapped in a colorful tunnel. Had he become numb to the idea of losing someone? He didn't know, but now it was his job to figure out what he truly felt. Maybe once things calmed down and Wilson was taken care of, Malcolm could find the peace he needed to sort everything out. For now, he decided to keep going. She can stay here as long as she needs to, but I hope she doesn't, he said. Mona looked closely at his face and then nodded. You're a good man, Malcolm Harris. Her words made him feel a wave of shame, and all he could do was nod silently. It's time for us to go. I'm really sorry for your loss. Remember, if you need anything, don't let pride stop you from reaching out, Mona said as she walked toward her husband. She took his hand, opened her umbrella, and led him to the car. Malcolm watched them for a moment, feeling regret about how his own life had turned out compared to the Leonards'. Everyone could see how much Mona and Roy cared for each other. Suddenly, Malcolm realized that part of his annoyance at Roy came from jealousy. Mona would never be unfaithful to Roy, and Malcolm couldn't imagine that ever happening. Roy had many qualities, but being unfaithful was definitely not one of them. Still, it was hard for Malcolm to picture a time when Roy would betray Mona. He shook his head in disbelief at such a thought. Turning his gaze to his kids, he saw they were deep in conversation with Claire. Eric stood almost in the center of the shelter, trying to shield himself from the rain, and was focused on something on his phone. Eric was always busy researching something, making deals, or reading on his phone when he wasn't at his office or home. Watching his children and partner, Malcolm thought about how, despite Jessica's betrayal and Wilson's actions, he needed to appreciate what he had. After all, things weren't all bad. Overall, this wasn't the next chapter he had hoped for. He was jolted back to his pain when he heard faint sounds nearby, but they didn't register in his mind. He was still too lost in his physical suffering to make sense of anything. Then, a final memory washed over him, and he tried to smile. He recalled Jessica's tragic fate. Her head had been shattered, leaving a large hole from a bullet. After that memory, everything went blank until he woke up moments ago. He thought he heard someone screaming, but it might just have been a memory echoing in his mind. Hadn't Jessica screamed when she was hurt? He wasn't sure, but the thought brought a slight smile to his lips. He felt someone nearby, but his eyes felt heavy and wouldn't open, as if glued shut. He thought he heard voices, but the sounds came closer and then faded away. Did they ever get close enough to really notice? No. It was something else. He heard the screams getting louder and clearer. Whoever it was, he wanted them to be quiet. Soon, a heavy tiredness overwhelmed him, pulling him back into a dark but peaceful place. It was like turning to the next chapter. Stop worrying. Dad, I'm okay. Things would be better if you didn't ask me how I feel every 5 minutes. A frustrated Jackson muttered. I really am fine. After looking at his son for a long moment, Malcolm nodded. Tricia, who was nearby, added her thoughts. Come on, Dad. Jackson is doing better. You're the one who needs to rest. You really need sleep. A lot of it. I'm staying here with Jackson, okay? But Malcolm began to speak, only to be cut off by Tricia. No buts. Daddy, now go upstairs and sleep. I'll wake you if anything happens. Shaking his head at his children's determination, Malcolm laughed and said, Okay, fine, you all win. I'm leaving. It had been 3 weeks since that awful day. Although Malcolm had nearly ended things with Jessica by now, he still felt her loss deeply, just like he felt for his kids. How could he not? He had been married to their mother for many years. Getting a divorce was one thing. Realizing she would never be in their children's lives again was another. Her death shocked everyone. His claim to the police about acting in self-defense was met with doubt. The worst part was that before passing out from blood loss, Wilson said that Malcolm Harris was involved and that he shot him while he, Ian Wilson, was defending himself against Jackson and his mother as he went up the stairs to his bedroom. Malcolm couldn't help but think back to that terrible morning. If he had arrived a minute or two sooner, maybe things would have changed. As soon as he reached the top step, the doorbell rang. It must be someone stopping by to check on him. Since the funeral, most people he knew had visited at least once. Some, like Mona Leonard, came over twice a week, not paying much attention to who was at the door. Malcolm walked toward his bedroom, and the more he thought, the more he realized the kids were right. He really wasn't getting enough sleep. Maybe he should see the family doctor for something to help him sleep better. Once he reached his bedroom, Malcolm felt the bed calling to him. Just as he was about to lie down, Tricia walked in behind him. "Dad, I hate to bother you, but the police are here. They want to talk to you." "I'm really sorry, Daddy. I told them you were resting, but they said it was very important to talk to you right now," Tricia said nervously. Malcolm turned around quickly, not responding to his daughter's words. He spoke gently, saying, "It's okay. I think it's just a formality. They'll ask their questions and then leave." Tricia gave a small smile and said, "Maybe you're right, Dad." As he smiled back at her, he walked down the stairs. "Yes, officers, how can I help you?" he asked the two military men on the porch. One of the officers, named Malcolm Harris, spoke in a serious voice. "Yes, that's me," Malcolm said, frowning at the officer's serious manner. "I'm Officer Harvey, and this is Officer Muldoon. We'd like to talk with you. Would you mind stepping outside, sir?" Even though it sounded like a question, it was clear that it was more like a command. After checking their name tags, Malcolm stepped out onto the porch without arguing. "Do you have a photo ID?" the same officer asked. Malcolm took his wallet from his back pocket and handed his driver's license to Officer Harvey. After checking it and scanning it with a device on his belt, Officer Harvey returned the license to Malcolm. Noticing Malcolm's confused look, Officer Muldoon smiled and said, "This is a new tool we're trying out. It scans licenses, gathers information, and helps us print tickets faster than writing them by hand. It makes things easier and saves us time with paperwork. But in your case, it's just to note that we've met with you." "Oh, I guess that's handy," Malcolm replied casually, feeling the tension rise. Before Officer Muldoon could explain more about the device, Officer Harvey said, "Mr. Harris, we need to ask you some questions about the shooting of Ian Wilson. We're just trying to clear up a few things from the investigation. Do you mind?" Without hesitating, Malcolm replied, "I don't mind, but I want my lawyer with me." He continued, "Sorry, but that's how it has to be." Harvey's eyes flashed with anger for a brief moment, but he kept his face calm and let it go. He felt frustrated that people sometimes avoided responsibility by asking for a lawyer. "I understand," Harvey said. "Please call your lawyer. We'll wait here." Malcolm felt a bit uneasy at the officer's tone and frowned as he thought about what they might be planning. "Sorry, officers, but unless you have a warrant, I need to ask you to stay outside my property," he said firmly. "I want to point out that there are several signs saying no trespassing around my property." Officer Muldoon glanced at his partner to see if he was upset by the criminal's defiance. Noticing that Harvey was calm, he turned to the criminal. "Sir, you must understand, we are not trespassing because laws don't apply to officers doing their job." "I see," the criminal replied. "But do those laws apply when you have no reason to be here? Besides, you either climbed over the fence or picked the lock to get onto my property. I can check the video to see which one you and Officer Harvey did. Do I need to do that?" After hearing Malcolm speak, the officers felt unsure, yet they still looked skeptical. "Sir, everyone has a right to privacy on private property, even for police officers. Unless a crime is happening or officers are chasing someone," he continued. "However, a no trespassing sign is often not enough to ensure that right when police are involved. That's why locked gates, fences, and cameras are important. The only thing missing from my plan for privacy is guard dogs or security guards." "Do you see what I mean?" Both officers were ready to argue, but they weren't sure how to defend their position in this situation. Then they noticed the man pointing to a corner of the porch. "I have several cameras outside my house. They record in high definition even at night, and they have microphones." "Yes, we are being recorded. The live feed goes to my server and a cloud service. So once again, I ask you to wait outside my property while I call my lawyer, Mr. Harris." "Why is it a problem for us to wait on your porch? Do you have something to hide?" Muldoon asked, challenging him. Malcolm looked at the two officers with curiosity. "We all have things we want to keep private. Even you, officers. If you're married and doing something wrong, would you want your wives to know? Of course not. You would want to keep that hidden," Malcolm said. stressing the words hidden and wrong. I could go on, but the point is, the law gives me the right to privacy on my own property, and I will protect that right. Just then, Tricia appeared in the doorway, speaking loudly. Daddy, Captain Albright is on the phone. He's on his way but wants to talk to you. Raising an eyebrow, Malcolm said, I need to speak with your boss. Unless you want me to explain my rights and how I feel they are being ignored, I suggest you go back to your car and wait. With a sigh, Harvey replied, Come on, Tom. We don't want to ignore anyone's rights. As he spoke, Harvey was already going down the steps, nodding his head. Officer Muldoon walked with Officer Harvey toward their car. Muldoon paused to say something to Malcolm but changed his mind and kept walking toward the gate. In the yard, Malcolm gave the officers one last look to see if they were really going back to their car. He shook his head and walked inside the house. Yes, this is Malcolm Harris, he said into the phone. Captain Albright, are those two officers still with you? Yes, sir, they are, Malcolm replied. Good. I want to talk to them when I arrive. You need to stay there too. We have some new information about your wife's death, and I need to discuss it with you, Captain Albright said. Understood, Malcolm said, sounding cautious, but I will need my lawyer with me. There was a brief silence before Albright answered. Mr. Harris, I can't tell you what to do. If you feel you need your lawyer, you can bring him. Okay, that answers my question. I'll see you when you get here, Captain Albright. Yes, sir, the police captain said before hanging up. Albright's tone was calm and polite. Malcolm thought this was because the captain was careful and wanted to avoid issues they had in the past with the police. But this only made him more nervous. Did you call my lawyer, Richard Santini? Malcolm asked. Yes, of course I did. You mentioned him yourself. Why don't you want him here? Tricia asked, worried she had misunderstood her father. I do want him here. Didn't Rick say when he would come? Malcolm replied. No, I haven't talked to him yet. I just left a message on his voicemail, Tricia said, her worry for her father growing. Dad, are the police going to arrest you again? She asked. I don't know. I have no idea what Albright wants to talk about. He just told me to wait, Malcolm said. Papa? Tricia shouted excitedly from the couch. Jackson was leaning on his strong arm. Come here! Father and daughter rushed over to Jackson. What happened? Are you okay, son? Malcolm asked, concerned. Yeah, I'm fine. Tricia just reminded me of something, Jackson said, looking a bit restless. What is it, Jackson? What did she remind you of? His father asked. It's about my phone, Jackson said nervously. I recorded what happened at Wilson's house. I wrote it all down, I think. What do you mean you think? You're not sure, his father asked, suddenly tense. No, I forgot about it until Tricia mentioned leaving a voicemail for your lawyer, Jackson said, looking sad. Since that day, I haven't needed my phone much. I was really out of it from the painkillers. I didn't even think to check if it recorded anything. Jackson's sister and father just stared at him. Okay, Jackson, let's not get our hopes up. But if he had recorded something, it might help. Trish, can you get my phone? I think I left it on the kitchen table, he said. His sister Tricia bounced on her toes, filled with hope, and darted into the kitchen. Hurry up, Jackson, the police are on their way. But Jackson didn't respond. He picked up his phone and quickly swiped the screen. Oh, yes, I recorded almost 3 hours of audio before the battery died. Hurry, Jackson, his sister urged. Yes, just give me a second, here's the folder, he shouted, feeling proud. Just then, they heard bootsteps on the porch outside. Captain Albright had arrived. Jackson, give your sister the phone now, Malcolm said quietly but firmly. No way, Jackson protested just as the door opened. Mr. Harris, I need to talk to you. It's urgent, Captain Albright said seriously. Come in, Captain, Malcolm replied, looking at Jackson and silently urging him to listen. We're in the parlor. Oh, you're already there? That's not good news, Albright said with a sympathetic sigh. I have a warrant for your arrest, Mr. Harris, and another for your son, Jackson Harris. Jackson's eyes went wide in surprise. Me? What have I done? He glanced at the young man on the couch, who had a big bandage around his stomach. Albright spoke into his radio. We need a medical transport to... Mr. Harris, are you going to come with us? The captain asked with an unfriendly tone. There was a hint of amusement in his voice. Yes, I will come peacefully, but I would like to wait for medical help to make sure my son is taken care of, Malcolm replied. After a moment, Captain Albright shook his head in disbelief and said, "I don't think that will be a problem. We'll have to put you in handcuffs, though. It's standard procedure." Malcolm shrugged. "I understand." He then turned and put his hands behind his back. "Jackson, give Trisha her phone. It's my—" he started to say. "Jackson, you can look at the pictures when you get out on bail, but right now Trisha needs her phone," Malcolm explained patiently, hoping his son would realize that the worst thing that could happen was losing his phone right now. Looking confused, Jackson slowly handed the phone to his sister, Trisha. "Try calling Santini again. Keep trying until you reach him. Tell him what's happening." Trisha picked up her brother's phone and went to the desk to dial the lawyer's number once more. She entered the number and waited, hoping to avoid voicemail. After the third ring, a voice answered. "Richard Santini, how can I help you?" The lawyer's deep voice filled her ears. Trisha quickly introduced herself and explained the situation, but she didn't mention the audio file. After hanging up, she told Malcolm that his lawyer was on his way to the jail. Meanwhile, the transport had arrived for Jackson, and the police were busy getting him onto a stretcher. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harris," said Captain Albright. "I can't arrest you or your son. A complaint was made against you both a few weeks ago. We struggled to reach the person who complained until just yesterday when we finally got their details. The district attorney has charged you with breaking and entering, attempted murder, unlawful use of a weapon, trespassing, intimidation, and intent to harm." Malcolm was shocked by the long list of charges. He knew who the complainant was, but couldn't understand why Wilson was pursuing Jackson. In the next chapter, Malcolm sighed, "Why didn't you get us that tape sooner? This could have saved a lot of trouble." Captain Albright sounded frustrated. "You should have reported it earlier." Malcolm started to reply, but Richard Santini, his lawyer, interrupted. "My client has explained everything already. The facts won't change no matter how many times you ask." The courtroom was tense, and Malcolm's lawyer often jumped in to support him. "Fine, you didn't know about the tape until after your arrest, but it seems a bit too convenient," Captain Albright said. "Even my son forgot about it until his sister reminded him." "Take it or leave it. That's what happened," Malcolm insisted. "Look, Captain Albright, my son is willing to give up his phone that has the original audio file. The only person who downloaded the recording was me, and I didn't listen to it. As far as I know, no one has heard that recording since it became known," Santini explained, thinking carefully about his words. Albright rubbed his face, trying to decide what to do. "All right. Hand over the phone. My team will look at it," he said. "And, Captain, how long will that take? I'm guessing your lab is probably buried under snow, so it might take some time for them to reach it. Am I right?" The lawyer glanced at him, clearly annoyed that his issue was being pointed out. He replied, "I'm not sure, Mr. Santini. I believe we can move things along. Why are you asking about that instead of answering the officer's question?" Santini opened his briefcase and took out several things, including a laptop. "Captain, here is the phone we are discussing," Santini said, handing a clear plastic evidence bag to the officer. There was a piece of paper attached to the bag with neat writing. "As you can see, there is a log showing who handled the phone. To my knowledge, this is an accurate record." Next, Santini lifted a thumb drive. "This USB drive has a copy of the recording. If you don't mind, I would like to listen to it now," he said with a serious expression. The captain frowned as he examined the small device and offered a plastic bag back to Santini. "How can I be sure the audio hasn't been changed?" Albright asked, cautious about what the lawyer had provided. "No offense meant," the attorney replied. "I asked the technician to make this copy for me. His name, date, and time are all noted in the log. He didn't access any other files or apps on the phone. Your team can check the phone and we'll see if it has been changed since the recording was made." Albright looked at the two men in front of him. The lawyer remained calm while Harris appeared uneasy, as if he worried about what the recording could contain. "All right, let's listen," Albright finally said. When Santini started the laptop and plugged in the USB drive, no one spoke. "As I mentioned, this is the raw audio without any edits. We can't be sure if you will understand anything in it." After a brief pause, Santini turned to Malcolm and gently put a hand on his shoulder, saying softly, "Whatever you hear, stay strong, Malcolm." He then faced the officer and asked, "Are you ready?" Albright nodded, saying, "Yes." Malcolm replied simply, Yes. A mix of unclear noises filled the room for a moment, followed by some muffled sounds. But one voice came through clearly. Forget what I said, you stupid! All three men listened closely as they talked about what happened nearly 4 weeks ago. Each word brought back feelings and memories. Malcolm felt powerless about what had already occurred, but he knew he needed to find a way to help. At times he was confused by what he heard, though his face stayed calm, with tears rolling down his cheeks. Then they heard the first gunshot, and Malcolm nearly jumped out of his chair. He sensed that his son had been shot, even though Jackson was safe. Just thinking about his son in danger filled Malcolm with a deep fear. Actually, hearing it was much worse. The men couldn't believe how coldly Wilson spoke about what he was doing. Even Albright was shocked by how much excitement Wilson showed while discussing his plans. Next, they heard Jessica Harris shout, "Wait!" Then came another loud gunshot. Wilson kept talking, and the gunshot echoed again. The policeman flinched when he heard it because he understood what it meant. Then there was the sound of a door opening, and a startled Wilson shouted something before another shot rang out. Albright glanced at Harris as the recording continued. Harris had stopped crying, but traces of tears were still on his face. Embarrassed, the policeman turned his gaze away. They finished listening to the recording, and the three men realized it was finally over. More than once, Malcolm wanted to shout for them to stop the tape, but he held back. It felt as if something had pierced his heart, while Richard Santini was left in disbelief about what the recording showed. At the same time, he felt a sense of relief and knew that his clients were innocent. Usually he wouldn't care much, but he was glad that Malcolm and his son would be free. After hearing the tape, Captain Albright felt sympathy for Malcolm Harris like he had never felt for a suspect before. It really mattered when he listened to the true story behind the case. He understood what Harris went through because of what his wife had done and how she had died, but he also had his job to focus on. "Well?" Santini asked the policeman. That simple word carried a lot of weight, and Albright understood what Santini and Harris wanted to know. "It's been very helpful, but it will take a few days to sort things out. If the audio checks out, Mr. Harris and his son should be clear of the charges in a couple of days. I'll personally take the recording to the lab and wait for the results. In the meantime, I'll give a copy to the DA. I can't promise he'll act right away, but I think we can get Mr. Harris out soon. I don't think he'll be spending the night here. Is that all right with you, Counselor?" After thinking about the cop's offer, Santini turned to Malcolm. "What do you think? Do you want to go with that?" Malcolm shrugged and said, "Sure, as long as my son is included in this." Harris and Santini looked at the policeman, sighing dramatically as they waited for a response. Albright nodded. "That's what I thought. Your son is part of this, but he still needs to be asked about the recording. Is that clear?" Malcolm agreed and added, "I have one request. Please don't pressure him, Mr. Harris. You're free now, but the district attorney can still bring other charges against you." "Your lawyer will explain that to you," Captain Albright warned, tapping his finger on the warrant he held. "Now, what do you want to know? When you arrest that guy, I want to be there. I want to have a moment with him before you take him away," Malcolm stated firmly. "Malcolm, I don't think that's a good idea," the counselor interrupted. "What do you want with him? He told us his plans on the tape. You know what he said." "I know, Richard, but I need to see him. Just keep your eyes on Albright," Malcolm said. "I won't hurt him. I just want to talk." After a moment of thought, Captain Albright nodded slowly. "I understand, but I can't take the risk of you losing control and doing something we would all regret." Richard Santini sighed with some relief. "Well, now that that's settled, I can—" Malcolm cut him off, saying, "Can I visit him in jail? Maybe before the trial?" He kept his eyes fixed on the policeman. Albright saw a man in pain, but also one who desired justice. He would assist as long as it didn't lead to any trouble. The police captain knew if the situation were switched, he might not be as calm as Harris. He thought to himself that Wilson wouldn't be alive anymore. Harris needed satisfaction, even if it was just a conversation. "I think we can arrange a prison visit," he said. Malcolm smiled, though it wasn't a warm smile. It was a hard smile that looked more frightening on his serious face. The lawyer glanced at the police captain and saw a similar expression on his face, which made him shudder at the seriousness of the situation. More than 7 months had passed since that terrible day. Ian Wilson was shocked when several police officers entered his hospital room, told him he was under arrest, read the charges aloud, and then handcuffed him to the bed railing. A few weeks later, Ian was moved to the hospital section of the prison, where he finished healing. Now, he sat on a bunk in his shared cell, going over the same letter for the 100th time. His hands used to be steady, but now they shook like leaves in the wind. The letter was from his lawyer, and he had received it 9 days ago. There was no good news, no matter how many times he wished for it. No matter how he looked at the complicated words, the message stayed the same. The letter said that his money, which was over $10 million, along with his houses and other investments worth around $18 million, were frozen. In total, that was $28 million he couldn't touch. This meant he was, for all practical purposes, broke. All that money was tied up in his life's work, and he had no access to it. His lawyers had tried to get some of that money back, even just to pay for his defense. So far, they had not been successful. What really angered Ian was that the person responsible for the frozen accounts was Malcolm Harris. Harris had filed a lawsuit against Ian's wife, which led the judge to freeze Ian's money until the case was settled. Maybe once he got out, he would pay Malcolm a visit. Those thoughts of revenge made him feel powerful, but they were cut short when a guard announced he had a visitor. After shackles were placed on his wrists and ankles, Ian was taken out. The guards guided him past a small room with screens and cameras used for video calls. He thought one of his lawyers was here. Maybe they had good news. Perhaps they had managed to dismiss that annoying audio file or had gotten some money released. He hoped for both, but maybe that was too much to wish for. Or maybe not. A cold smile crept onto Ian's lips. The guard stopped Ian in front of a heavy metal door with a small glass window. Another guard unlocked the door, and Ian sat on a metal chair fixed to the floor. One guard watched while the other locked Ian's wrists to metal rings in the table and floor. Once they were satisfied with their work, one guard gave each ring a hard pull to make sure it was secure. Then both guards left the room, leaving Ian alone. They didn't say a word, and neither did he. Ian had learned that talking to guards outside of basic needs was a bad idea. If the guards even spoke to a prisoner, others could see it as snitching. Once a prisoner was labeled a snitch, they could never gain trust again. No one would want to be their friend or have their back. Ian had learned, adapted, and found ways to survive in prison. He might not have to stay in this situation for much longer. So, with some impatience and hope, he waited for his lawyer. After what felt like a long time of sitting alone in silence, Ian lost track of time. Suddenly, the heavy metal door on the other side of the room opened. A guard stepped in and stood by the door. Ian heard the door open and then shut behind him. When he turned to look, he saw a guard had entered and stood just like the other guard in front of him. This was different. Ian had met with his lawyers 3 times, and after being secured, the guards would leave so he could talk to them alone. It wasn't his lawyers who had come to see him. This new situation sparked Ian's curious interest, breaking the dullness of his long day. Wilson heard the far door slam shut with a loud bang. Then the door right in front of him opened, and a visitor entered. "Malcolm Harris," he said. Wilson thought he should have guessed who it was, but he was too caught up in his own troubles to think straight. However, the arrival of the man he recognized was expected. A sly smile spread across Ian's face. "Unless it's Jessica's husband, Malcolm Harris." He said this loudly so the guards and anyone nearby could hear. Instead of reacting, Harris just walked to the table, sat down, and stared at Ian. His eyes shone like brown stones under the bright lights. For some reason, those eyes reminded Wilson of a snake, cold and distant. Malcolm Harris's face showed no emotion. It was as if it were made of stone. Ian understood what Harris was trying to do. He often used this technique in meetings. It was a way to make the other person feel uneasy. Whoever looked away first lost. The first to give in from the pressure was at a disadvantage from then on. Ian was skilled at this game and could outlast anyone. What could this suburban man do against someone experienced like him? Nothing. Harris was so still that Ian wondered if he was even breathing. In a moment of silence, Wilson felt the anger rise. The cold, steady stare from Harris seemed to reach deep inside him. "Why are you here? Did the news of your wife not tell you enough? Come on, speak up!" Only silence answered him. After a moment, Ian broke the quiet. "Say something. Why did you come? Did you want to see someone better than you?" Harris sat still like a statue. Wilson started yelling at him, calling him names and saying mean things. He finished his outburst, feeling proud of himself, and looked at the guards to see their response, expecting them to react in some way. He was shocked to see both guards staring straight ahead, their faces as blank as Harris's. They were like more statues. For a few more minutes, Wilson kept yelling while Harris remained silent, unaware of the guards. Ian felt like he was in a strange dream. "I just want to go back to my cell," Wilson shouted at the guard behind him. He waited for a few seconds, but nothing happened. The guard didn't move. The door stayed closed. "Guards, get me out of here!" Wilson yelled, feeling close to losing it. "I want my cell!" Still, no one responded. Ian was ready to shout at the guards when he suddenly heard a cold voice ask him a question, as if it was coming from a robot. Ian turned to look at Harris. "What did you say?" Malcolm sat calmly on the outside, but inside he felt a strong desire for revenge. He wanted to see the light leave Wilson's eyes and watch his face go blank. Instead of acting, Malcolm waited. He knew Wilson had heard the question. "Why do your troubles belong to me? Why are your mistakes actually my burden?" Wilson fiddled with his brow, surprised. "Why not? You're not going to argue with me about words?" "No," Ian replied with a harsh laugh. "How nice of you. A real coward." When Malcolm didn't respond, Wilson decided to share his version of the truth, hoping to finish what Ian had started a long time ago. "Let me tell you," he began. "When I was younger, starting my second year at Ridgemont University, I got in because of a soccer scholarship. I loved it there, playing soccer, being single, and having freedom. Are you still with me, jerk?" Ian looked into Malcolm's eyes and saw his own reflection, but he was listening. "One hot summer afternoon, my friend and I were walking in a park near the school when we saw a girl running by. We wanted to talk to her, but she laughed at us and ran off. I hated being laughed at, and I still do. So, my friend and I chased after her. We just wanted some fun, maybe teach her to be nicer. That's when you showed up. You grabbed us. Remember? You jerk?" Malcolm had almost forgotten that moment, even though that was when he had met Jessica. He never thought much about that memory. It was a long time ago. Could it be possible? "Yes, I'm glad you think that, you jerk, because I can never forget it, you jerk. You broke my ankle and hurt my ligaments. It ended my dreams of playing soccer. I was even planning to go pro. Then they took away my scholarship. I couldn't go back to school. But I didn't know any of this at the time. I was in the hospital for weeks with a cast on my foot and ankle. I waited for the police to come. Every time I opened the door to that hospital room, I expected the police to show up. But they didn't. I figured you didn't tell anyone what really happened. I told my family that I hurt myself while running. When I finally got out, my parents broke the news to me. They didn't tell me about school until I was feeling better at home. My ankle got better, but my leg stayed the same. I have walked with a limp ever since. I promised myself I would get back at you and her. I didn't know the girl's name or the boy who helped her, but I didn't give up. I asked around about the girl who ran in the park. It wasn't until your wedding was announced that I got close to you. I still didn't realize it was you at first, but then I got lucky and learned how you met that girl. And just like that, I had you in my sights. Then fate played a part. It was a family reunion. A friend of mine was related to the Robertsons and invited us both. All I wanted was to reclaim what was taken from me, something I felt I deserved for a long time. Then you showed up. You almost drowned me. So, yes, you made it personal. And you know the rest." Malcolm leaned back, surprised by what he had just heard from Ian Wilson. It was strange. How could someone hold a grudge for so long? Did everything happen just to impress Jessica all those years? That guy was something else. He better wrap this up before he did something he would regret later. Shaking his head in disbelief, Malcolm slowly stood up. Ian watched as Harris rose from the table. "I'm almost done. Then I'll leave you alone with what's waiting for you," Malcolm said calmly, pointing toward the main part of the prison. "Your story doesn't end here, does it, Wilson? You didn't play soccer, but you've done quite well for yourself since. With hard work and determination, you turned some junk into a successful business. Your net worth is about $30 million. Yes, you are clever and tenacious. You deserve some credit." Malcolm could see that his compliments were making Ian feel proud. Then Harris finally smiled widely, though it looked more like a shark's grin. "Well, Ian Wilson, I'm happy for you, but I'm going to take everything from you. Sure me? Then I'm going to give it to some charities. Think about it. All that hard work, a man's entire life spent on something. It's gone, just like that. But the good part, at least for you, is that you won't have to die to give to charity." Anger rushed into Ian and he started yelling, "You won't get anything! You can't touch him! My lawyers will fight you all the way!" "Oh, I didn't say it would be easy. I know it won't be, but I will win in the end," Malcolm said with his usual smile. The smile faded, and Malcolm's face became serious, though his eyes looked even tougher than before. "You tried to ruin Jackson, and you almost did. Honestly, if you don't dodge the death penalty and somehow get out of prison before you die, once you walk out those gates, you won't even have a chance to enjoy your freedom before it's taken away." Malcolm spoke calmly, but Ian understood he meant every word. Ian Wilson, being who he was, refused to show any fear. Instead, he glared at Malcolm, and if looks could kill, Malcolm would have fallen 1,000 times. "One last thing," Malcolm said. "This is for you." He pulled out a sealed envelope and tossed it on the table. A little nighttime reading. Malcolm turned and walked to the door, which the guard had already opened, stepping outside and leaving Ian alone with the other guard. Ian turned to the guard and asked, "Sir, may I open the envelope?" He felt anger for the place he was in, for those controlling what he could and couldn't do, and mostly for the shame of having to ask to read what was inside. The guard glanced at Ian with disdain. "Yes, you have 5 minutes, and then I'm taking you back to your cell." Slowly, Ian reached for the envelope and, with some effort due to his restrained wrists, opened it carefully. At first, he didn't understand what he was reading, but then it became very clear. He let out a low groan that got louder. "No, come back, you liar! It's lies!" He felt a hand grip his head and push him down onto the table. "Calm down. If you don't calm down, you'll get hit with a taser," the guard warned. "Can you hear me?" "Yes, yes, I can hear you." Ian gasped, trying to calm himself, but as he lay there, face pressed against the cold metal, he felt something slipping away. It felt like something important was leaving his life. Only emptiness was left where hope used to be. Another guard came in and helped free Ian from his restraints as he was led out of the room. He stumbled like he was an old man or someone who had been broken. The guard, who was in the room while Malcolm was there, picked up the envelope and papers that were left on the table. He quickly glanced through them. "Hey, wait a minute. These are yours. It's the DNA test results. Don't you need this?" he asked. Ian looked sadly at the guard and replied in a faint voice filled with defeat. "No, I don't want it." "Are you not the father?" the guard questioned. "That's the problem. I'm not the father," Ian whispered. There was no hope in his voice as the heavy door closed behind him with a loud clang. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.